This is the 21.5 Show.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Whether you're a professional pilot or want to be one, you're in the right place.
Let's get started.
Join professional aviators Dylan and Max as they talk their experience in the airlines, business aviation, and more.
Life is good.
Industry experts, unique stories, and plenty of fun. This is the 21.5 Show.
Here we go.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of the 21.5 Show. It's a podcast for professional pilots by two professional pilots. My name is Dylan. If you're new to the show, welcome. I'm a business aviation professional, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Max. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Max. I'm a airline pilot as well as a business aviation pilot who finds himself between airplanes currently, but soon to return.
Okay. So, yeah, we'll plug that at the end of the show. I have a question for you, though, Max. I heard your airline is going single pilot. Is that true?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't know.
I heard it went single pilot today.
Communication, but I heard that
today
somebody passed out.
Yeah.
I guess.
Crazy. And then I read just like something on Twitter, and they basically said a captain got incapacitated shortly after takeoff, and then they put was it a jump seater? Did you hear?
Nothing official yet.
Okay. So I think we've all thought about this. Joel, you've probably thought about this too, right? Like you're in an airplane and you think, oh, something happens. And they call you. Are there any pilots on board? What would you do, Joel, if you were the only guy?
Joel had that dream last night, actually, and then he had to change his sheets in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just curious, like, it's a different perspective. For us, if they called us up, we'd be like, are we going to get paid for this?
Am I getting paid for this?
Yeah, exactly. Are we getting paid for this?
What's the min guarantee on
this?
this?
Exactly.
This has got to be premium, right?
Exactly.
I was not planning on
short
doing
call. This is within an hour's notice. Yeah.
This is definitely move up pay.
Yeah, exactly.
Me moving from the back to the front.
Yeah. Plus, it's probably a higher pay rate, bigger airplane. So then I got to get that fee too. So yeah. But Joel, what would you do? You're sitting in the back of a 737. They said, "Is there a pilot on board?" Would you ring the bell?
All my Diamond DA-20 hours have been preparing me for this.
Yeah, so you're ready to go. You'd go up there. You'd do it.
I would just get front row seats to the black box recording. So there you go.
I think you'd make it down. You'd put it down.
Yeah. What a scab. He didn't even negotiate the pay or anything.
Yeah. He just crossed the picket line, walked right in.
He just showed up so eager.
I got this, guys. Where's the mixture?
I produced a podcast about aviation.
Yeah.
I'm ready. Put me in, coach.
I have many hours of podcast production. Yeah, it's funny because I remember thinking that back when I was like a private pilot in training, and I'd go home and it's in the airline. I wonder if I could land this thing. Now, let me ask you a different question, Max. You're flying in the 737. The other pilot's incapacitated. Would it actually be helpful? Let's say that the other pilot strapped into their seat is not like interfering with any of the controls or anything, like they're clear. Would it be helpful to bring another pilot up if you're trying to get on the ground quickly, or do you feel like it would almost be more difficult? Like, let's say it's not a 737 pilot.
It depends on where it's at, right? Because here's the thing. If you're on your way to Hawaii over the middle of the ocean, I'd be more worried about the incapacitated pilot not getting any medical attention. Like maybe he had a heart attack and he's an AED. Like I'd be worried about getting him into the back and then resecuring the cockpit, and then because you can fly it by yourself for a while.
But let's say like in this scenario,
the bathroom. It was shortly after takeoff.
Shortly after. That's what I'm saying. Like shortly after takeoff.
I think I would just like declare an emergency. And I was talking about this with the guy I'm flying with today. It's a lot less workload intensive if you declare an emergency and they part the seas. There's no like slow to 180. Descend here, about all this nonsense that you normally get. Would just be like, here you go. You're cleared for the visual approach, whatever you want. And then that would be much easier, I think, to do, especially from the radios and all than a normal traffic environment. So, I would get down, slow down, and put it on the ground and get to the gate. Well, see, the problem is you're in the right seat. Yeah. You can taxi off.
You could get clear, and then from there, you could kind of work on moving the airplane.
Yeah.
Getting some help. Yeah.
And then, you'd have to be like, listen, I'm not going to be able to taxi after we land. I'm going to clear it at high speed. So have the fire department or someone here to get the incapacitated dude off and send another captain out. I'm not driving it around. I'm not swapping seats and driving it.
I have control.
Again, I don't get paid for that. So
that's right. That's not in the contract.
I will set the brake and shut down the engines.
Can you set the brake easily from the right seat?
Well, see, the problem is when they open the door, then it's going to send in the times. And don't set
the brake.
Make sure you come to the service door.
Yeah.
Not the captain.
This is awful.
No.
You don't
what
set the
pay
brake.
rate
You
is.
just hold the brakes, right? And then you don't have you want the air car.
You just chalk this thing. You can't set the brake from my side. From what I understand, in all seriousness, the FO did a great job. And it's always easy to quarterback what you would do in that situation, in a situation we have no idea the details of.
Yeah.
Or what actually happened. Like if you were 2,000 feet of the ground, yeah, that's one thing. If you're at cruise, it's a lot of factors that go into those decisions.
I feel like I had a sim event where the instructor had briefed the other pilot kind of privately and was like, don't just stop responding here after this approach. It's actually really good. I wouldn't say it's the normal in a training event, but I've had it happen a couple times.
Well, we train for that sort of when we fly a Cat 3 HUD approach because it's not auto land. And only the captain has a HUD on his side. So the captain has to fly it. If there's procedure where if they don't respond to a call, like the decision altitude's 50 feet. So approaching minimums, like you're 150 feet above the ground. If there's no response, you take the aircraft and execute the go around without even like any more talking. And that's in the event of, right,
because there's
0.00001% chance of that ever happening. But yeah, because there's no time. You're so close to the ground. So because you like guard the thrust levers like under the captain's hands, so you can knock them away and execute the missed approach. Like there is some planning for that situation. But did you hear about too the BA pilot that passed away on the overnight? Like right before he was supposed to fly? Yeah. He collapsed and died in the crew hotel lobby shortly before he was due to captain a flight from Heathrow.
Jiminy Christmas.
Yeah, to Cairo. And he suffered like a massive heart attack and died.
What a tone to start this episode.
Yeah.
Sobering.
It's the Professional Pilots podcast, not the Happy Pilots podcast.
I guess so, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about, man. Yeah, that is interesting. The incapacitation thing is weird. I think your point is right on. It would really depend on where it happened. Same thing like if you're coming in on landing, like in a visual, it might be easier just to come in and land.
Yeah, because your first concern is everybody else on board. And then secondly, it's the person that's incapacitated to get down. And then on my first flight this morning, on my way out, I heard another airplane there that had a lady that was unresponsive, having a seizure in the back, and they're coordinating this whole thing. So stuff happens all the time.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you were like turning the runway lights on for somebody and sighting it.
No, unfortunately, Dylan, I wasn't able to save the day this time.
Okay.
But,
you weren't spouting off an AIM recommendation. The AIM recommends that you overfly and observe the segmented circle.
So we came back from spring break, and there's this Arizona Pilots Association group camping trip that is at this airstrip called Grapevine, which that they kind of have brought back from the brink of death from the Forest Service and done a lot of work, and now it's awesome. So they have a camping trip there, except for over the summertime, once a month. And I've been wanting to go to it, and I always have something going on. So we come back, we get home late at night on Friday, and the camping trip is that weekend. And I'm like, what? If we don't go, there's one next month, and then it's off till it cools off again. I already know we can't go to the one next month. So I'm like, well, if we don't go, we're not going to be able to go. I'm like, let's just man up and go. So we load up the airplane, we blast off the next day, we make whatever side dish my wife makes, and we blast off and we go to the camping thing. And so I pull off the runway, and this guy comes up and goes, "Hey, I'm Randy. Nice to meet you." I'm like, God, that guy sounds familiar. And I look, and he has an APS lanyard or something on, like something that said APS on it. And I'm like, yeah. Oh, I was like, I think we've met before. I've taken your course at the upset recovery training thing. Yeah. A minute later, I'm like, wait, Randy. I'm like, wait, we interviewed you on our show. It was Randy from APS that we interviewed about the whole upset training thing. He's like, oh my God, that's it. Yeah. So
but in all fairness, that was a phone interview.
Yeah.
So we didn't see his face. So just in fairness to you.
At APS.
Right.
I've seen him there.
Right. I'm just trying to defend you a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah. So anyway, we recognize each other. And again, the small world, you never know who you're going to run into at a remote backcountry airstrip.
And then did you challenge him to a Lomshavak contest in your...
Then we just immediately took off. We did some formation aerobatics, just small air show for everybody.
Yeah, it's nice.
And we demonstrated some advanced recovery techniques to promote safety. So that was actually my good deed since the last show.
Push, roll, power, stabilize.
Stabilize. That's right.
Yeah, that's actually a really good episode. If you didn't hear that one, we'll have a link in the show notes. That was
it's a really good course, too.
Absolutely.
Recommend.
I'm going to be going to it soon. So as many of you know, I have been very sheltered for the last 7 years. Zero international flying. Did my first international trip last week and was clearing customs here back in Scottsdale. I didn't know when the customs officer comes out now, they don't even look at your passport anymore. They scan your face with like this little iPhone.
Did you know they also walk around with this Geiger counter scanner too? Have you been here since that happened?
The passengers asked me what that was, and I told them it was a COVID detector.
Did you really?
Yeah. I think they knew I was kidding.
Everybody keep your mouth closed.
Yeah. But yeah, I didn't know about the face scanner thing.
We sure that wasn't just some guy with an iPhone?
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, right. Good point, Joel.
He had a uniform.
Yeah, he did have a uniform. That's probably been going on for like 6 years, and I'm just now figuring it out. So
continue to embarrass yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, like you say, fake it till you make it.
That's right.
What exotic international destination did you go to?
Well, we crossed several large bodies of water. I think we were in the air for almost an hour and 40 minutes. It was very exotic.
Wait. Did you cross the Sea of Cortez?
I did.
Unrefueled?
That's correct.
Oh,
Yep.
my.
Yep.
That's
Nonstop.
incredible.
Yep. Feet wet, feet dry, class 2 navigation.
Full drift down calculations, the whole thing. Huh?
I'm actually sending Joel all of my international flight logs so they can be safely stored for the required amount of time.
In the 21.5 vault.
Exactly. In our fireproof safe at 21.5 headquarters. Yep.
Along with L. Ron Hubbard's writings we have kept in there as well.
Yep. Yeah.
Right here. I got it right here.
He's got it right there. It's perfect. It is a big day for your boy. My favorite part is when you're talking to the Mexican controllers, there's always that little, like, you want to use a tiny little bit of Spanish on the radio, but you don't want to use too much because they might respond in Spanish. So it's sort of like it's a little dance you have to perform.
For one,
yeah,
I don't think you're in any danger of anybody mistaking you for a full Spanish speaking person. Okay.
It's happened before.
I mean, not even if they look at you, just on the radio.
I don't know.
Do you don any sort of accent?
I mean, that's the problem is you want to you don't want to say Buenos Dios. And so,
in my opinion, the only acceptable Spanish to use on the radio is Buen dia, which is about as far as I think is acceptable without making yourself look like an idiot.
Can you switch over and use Royer while you're south of the border?
No,
No? Okay.
I don't think so. I think that's more for the native speakers.
Okay. Then most important, for folks that have not flown to Mexico, I would say probably the most important word to learn is hielo. Do you know what that means? That's ice. If you need some ice from me.
Oh.
Yeah.
We have a controller at Scottsdale whose English is, I don't think, her first language.
Okay.
And I love when she cuts the ATIS with information Yankee, because she calls it Scarsdale Airport Information Yankee, because they have a hard time with saying Y.
Oh, yeah.
And that's often mispronounced. And so it's, Christian, I often joke about information Yankee.
Yankee.
But here's the thing. What do you think the Mexican controllers are saying about you when you attempt to use Spanish, that you're so worried about being mistaken for a native Spanish speaker?
I don't know. They're just like, get out of our airspace. That's what they're thinking quickly. Oh, man. But we survived. That was a great trip. It's good to be spreading my wings. So I'm putting a call out to our listeners. It's time to make another layover guide. Cabo San Lucas. Let's do it. If you got suggestions about where to stay, what to eat.
Squid Row. Enough
where
said.
to go. Yep.
Next question.
Send us an email, info@215podcast.com, and we'll be putting that together. If you haven't seen the way we do it, it's on the website. And what's cool is all our listeners send suggestions, and then we make it into this really cool little Google Maps file. So you just click one click to subscribe to it in your Google Maps app on your phone. And then any city that you're in, they appear as little blue squares on your map. And then next time you're in a random city, you're just like, open it up and you're like, oh, there's a blue square over there. And you click on it to see what it is. And then you'll be like, oh, great taco shop or whatever. So
yeah, I will be utilizing it tomorrow on my Orange County overnight.
Oh,
which is one of my favorite guides.
Yeah, David put that one together. Shout out to
David.
That was
really
excellent.
Went all out.
Yeah. So speaking of listener submissions, though, I think we've gotten some reviews, emails, all that good stuff. Joel, what's in the pipeline for us?
Yeah, on the review side, the comment side from YouTube, what an amazing interview. This is on Roger Reeves Part 2. I've seen him on a couple other podcasts, but you guys came at him from an aviation side. Very enlightening. Great job, Kurt.
Thanks, Kurt.
God, I was almost thinking he was going to say that was the best interview of all, which would have mean we beat Lex Friedman and Sean Ryan, which would have been awesome.
Two really good.
So close.
Yeah.
So close.
Next time. Okay, on to the mailbag, which is, of course, sponsored by Advanced Aircrew Academy, aircrewacademy.com, to see all of their offerings for your flight department. Get yourself educated. We did a big section on weather radar, Max. My new airplane has multi-scan weather radar.
Oh, welcome again, Dylan, to the 21st century.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Next time, Max, I'm going to tell you about this new hot little thing we've got on our ride called PDC. But I'm going to save that. I don't want to blow your mind. I'm going to wait. We're going to save that for another time.
You decide now that you can leave the tilt angle calculator at home?
Yeah.
Finally?
Exactly. Bore sighting the beam and painting. Yeah, exactly.
Set that you can ground map the Cortez.
If all these terms are confusing, you need to take that weather radar module from our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy. We'll have a link in the description. And we did an entire episode on it with Dan, and it's been one of our most popular episodes. That tells me a lot of people either don't know how to use weather radar or
until they make
faking
it.
Until they make it. I think that's our new 21.5 cup that we'll be producing soon in t-shirt.
We're going to retire flexibility is the key to air power.
Yeah.
Just go with fake it till you make it. In light of the reduced hiring minimums in the industry, we're shifting gears to stay current.
Do your best.
Relevant.
Yeah.
Until you make it.
Yeah. I think you're going to do it. Anyways, thanks to Advanced Aircrew Academy for sponsoring the mailbag. On to our first letter. What do we got?
So this first one's a really heartfelt one, but pretty lengthy, so just tune in here. Really enjoyed the show since I discovered it a few months ago. A little background, I'm a later 30s career changer, just about finished with my hours with a regional class date in early summer. I'm reaching out about a very sad incident that happened in the last few weeks. A young mid-20s friend and fellow CFI at the flight school I'm at made the unfortunate decision to take his own life. It was quite a shock to many of us. He was what I would call a golden retriever in human form. A very happy, friendly guy, one of my colleagues I really enjoyed being around both professionally and away from the airport. He was maybe 3 months behind me from starting at the same regional with a very bright future. The reason I'm reaching out is that I later found out that he had a potentially career-affecting incident that, looking back, seems to have been the reason that he made that unfortunate decision. He thought what happened was a career ender, not realizing it was very likely not. He was 26 and was arrested on suspicion for DUI, and learning the details, unlikely he would have been convicted, and he made the decision the night before the 7-day window required to inform the FAA of the arrest, which is incorrect, but apparently was given bad info. At least this is the perspective of events as understood by those close to him. In my previous career working with young adults, I was a D1 football coach for about 7 years. Young people make mistakes, as many of us have. And while many times we couldn't directly get involved, we could offer advice and point them to appropriate resources to help them in whatever situation they may have found themselves in. Once at an airline, the unions are there as advocates and can point pilots to resources. AOPA exists, but has membership fees, and at times doesn't seem totally relevant for a young pilot or CFI scraping by to get to where they are trying to go professionally. Do you guys know of any kind of pilot mentorship resources out there for young pilots, CFIs, trying to make this their profession? Ideally something anonymous, where someone could get connected to a more senior or experienced pilot who could look at a situation such as my friend's, talk to them about what they might have seen or experienced in the past, and point them to helpful resources. A kind of emergency mentorship at no cost. Not a crisis hotline like 988, pilots, not counselors. If not, do you think something like this could work? I may be grasping for straws to find some kind of positive that can come from this situation, but would like to try. Regardless, if you could mention the National Suicide Prevention Hotline of 988 for anyone experiencing a crisis like this, I'd really appreciate it. All the best, Anonymous.
That's sad. That's awful. I mean, 26 years old.
Terrible to hear.
I was just going to say, I mean, to answer his question off the top of my head, I don't know of any resources other than, honestly, our anonymous flight advice forum, which is kind of why we do it. Because the thing is, something like that, especially when you're 26, is going to be very hard. Like when you're a CFI, I remember like kind of some of the mentors were people that were my CFIs at the time that had then maybe moved up to the next level. Like that's not something that's easy to go talk to somebody that's a friend or whatever to say that you made that kind of a mistake. So it's the anonymous thing, I think, that's important. So, but I don't know, do you have any other resources?
So yeah, I would point them in a couple different directions, and I would say I 100% agree with you on the point of your peers. This is a tough one to like get help from your peers on this one. He mentioned AOPA. So the AOPA legal services that they offer, I think subscribing to that is less than a couple $100 a year, depending on the level that you're at. Once you're probably a CFI, it's probably time to start paying for that if you can afford it, because I don't really think you're going to be calling an attorney and then you're going to have attorney-client privilege. So like you're not going to remain anonymous. So I think that's one angle, because from the email mentioned, like he didn't really understand the legal process, maybe got some bad advice. So you need an attorney that's going to be working for you if you're in some type of like a certificate action situation. So you need to understand what's going on. And then the second thing that you need to do, and again, this isn't anonymous, but I don't think that's really what you want. You need to talk to a career coach. And not because they're going to tell you like exactly what to do, but in this example, like how many times have we heard from James saying we get people hired with DUIs all the time? So I think
that's probably exactly what he needed to hear.
Exactly what he needs to hear is like your career is not over, and here's how we're going to handle it going forward. So I think that it's more about reaching to people that you probably don't know, but people that are dealing with this all the time is the most important thing there. And that's one of those scenarios where like it's going to make your career a little bit more difficult for sure, but it's not like it's over. So very sad to hear. And of course, our condolences to the family of the airmen that had to go through this. But I really appreciate the listener writing in to raise awareness for this, because James is coming on the show here in a little bit, and he'll be the first to tell you that there's very few obstacles you can't overcome.
Especially being in your 20s, like we've all made mistakes.
Yep.
Some worse than others, but it goes without saying it's never worth taking your own life. But there's a lot you can recover from. And when you're in your early 20s, those mistakes look really big until later in life you learn that everybody's made dumb decisions and mistakes. And it'd be a lot easier for me to tell you that I got arrested on suspicion of DUI than it would have been when I was 26. Like way easier. Because now we all know we're older and we know we've all made mistakes. And
there are resources out there. Legal, career advice, I would say, are the two that you want to go to. And I think a lot of people think that a career coach is something you use to like get you hired at Delta Airlines, which is true, but they can start advising you as soon as like when you're in college. They can help you craft a strategy before you even become a CFI. So just because you're getting started in your career doesn't mean that they can't provide assistance. So that's a tough one, but there are resources out there. What's next, Joel?
Dear 21.5 guys, I was listening to episode 94, and you mentioned doing a follow-up to episode 71. That's what's it like to be married to a pilot and raise a family. I'm currently in the process of jumping ship from the 135 I've been with for several years to go to the 121 world. My wife and I found it's time for a change, as 7 days on is no longer doing it for our family. I'd be interested in how the lifestyle is different for the pilot, as well as the people they leave behind at home for 135 versus 121. Thanks for the great content. Keep up the good work. Sincerely, Anonymous.
So the differences are vast. Also, the differences between 135 to 135 can be very vast. I think 121, you can kind of say, at least with the big airlines, it's all pretty darn similar. But it sounds like from a 7 on and 7 off, like, here's the thing. When you become an airline pilot, a 4-day seems like this insurmountable obstacle. Sometimes you're like, oh, I got a 4-day this week. In which you're probably listening to this laughing. Like literally, I bid specifically to never have 4 days. I hate 4 days. That's how big of a sissy you become, because a 3-day is really only a 2.5 day if you really want to look at it like that way. And so the difference is you go to work for much shorter stretch. Now, of course, there's exceptions to all that, and 121 and cargo and 747, all that stuff. But if we're talking generically, like airlines to the 7 on, 7 off, 135 schedule, some of the other things that are really nice is the ability to trade your trips, move your work around to accommodate your life versus always moving your life around to accommodate your work. That was what was the biggest game changer for me. I've said this before on the show, going from business aviation, I was Part 91, but being able to have options if you wanted to do something when you had to work, like there was no options before, like not even like calling it sick, or it's just not a thing in that side of the business. So what else would you say, Dylan, from the lifestyle perspective?
So typically if you're 7 on, 7 off, your schedule maybe for a year. The one adjustment for your family is going to be the monthly bid, right? And so you're going to bid for a schedule, and you're going to find out the month before, maybe 15 to 20 days before the month starts, what you got. And so from a family standpoint, that is an adjustment that you mentioned your wife was kind of wondering what the difference is going to be like. That's going to be one of the things. Now, just because you got something that was awarded to you doesn't mean that's actually what you're going to do. But there is kind of you kind of live in a more of a month to month lifestyle, I would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The other thing, too, is in that 7 on, 7 off schedule, when you are home for the summer and your kids are not in school, you could plan a 5 or 6 day or 7 day trip whenever you want on your 7 off. Whereas when you're working every week, you're either going to have vacation or you're going to have to shove trips together and work 6 days one week, which maybe is not so bad since you're used to it. And put the 3 day from that week, move it to the previous week and work 3 days, go home and then get up the next day, fly another 3 days so you can have the following week off. There's things like that are not going to be quite as easy to get a week off like it was every other week at your last gig.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's pretty easy to string 21 days off together, one sick call or one vacation if on a 7 on, 7 off. That's something to think about. The other thing is you'll be starting at the bottom of the seniority list, which means that the way that they do vacations is that every airline's a little bit different. We'll just make one up. I don't know, when's yours, Max, for next year? It'll be like what, in October or something you'll bid for vacation?
Yeah, something. I honestly, I don't know.
It'll be sometime in the fall, probably you'll bid. And think about when everyone wants to take vacation. That's when the senior people will take vacation. Okay? Summer, Christmas, Thanksgiving, etc.
Spring break.
Yeah, spring break. That's a really good one. Bottom of the seniority list, April, February.
And then at least on the 7 on, 7 off, you had 2 weekends off a month.
Right. Exactly.
Welcome to no weekends off a month.
You're probably not going to have weekends off for a while. So those are some of the main things. Good news is you're going to be home a lot more, probably.
Yeah, and it gets better as obviously you start at the bottom and then it's all... Good news is it's all uphill from there.
Yeah, exactly. So you start off with like worst case scenario and then it gets better. So if it was me choosing between 7 on and 7 off or doing the airline, I would definitely do the like 4 on, 3 off or 3 on, 4 off type deal. That's just me.
Yeah, the 3 on, 4 off is very easy. Like fly 2 days, I'm home in the afternoon and it's not that big of a deal.
Yep. Hopefully those answer some of your questions. I'm sure our listeners will have more for you to think about, but go for it. All right, that's going to do it for the mailbag. Thanks to everyone that wrote in, info@215podcast.com. Or if you've got something anonymous you want to send in to us, you can visit our website, scroll down and look for the flight advice button and send it in. We've got a bunch of flight advice queued up. And Max, actually the rest of this episode, we're just going to be reaching out to a couple of our diamond dogs and talking about some hot topics that keep popping up. So we're looking forward to talking to our friend Tim Pope. Covered a wide range of topics with Tim, talking about regional airline bonus traps that people are getting stuck into when they're trying to advance, tax time considerations. We talked about Delta's new contract and some of the ramifications of making all that money pilots could have. And then after that, James Onieal is going to jump on and we're going to talk a little bit more about airline pilot strategy and kind of trying to figure out, should I stay at a regional? Should I go to a low-cost carrier if my ultimate goal is to get to the majors? And then hopefully we're going to get some good tech talk out of James, too, on instrument approaches. We haven't done a technical topic in a while, so I think that'll be exciting to cover a little bit about... are you going to ask him about Cat 3 stuff?
I hadn't given that much thought, Dylan. We'll just see where the conversation goes. Yeah, that's the pilot list airplane.
Right, yeah, exactly. So stay tuned for a Diamond Dog studded episode of the 21.5 show. Here we go.
Hey guys, so before we begin, just want to throw the disclaimer out. So anything that I say today is not intended as specific advice for anybody's circumstance. So certainly consult your own tax professional and complete your own due diligence.
Max, we're so pleased to welcome our friend and certified financial planner Tim Pope back to the show. And Tim, you were telling us a little bit about some of the street cred you've got. We heard that you're flying a 172 with a 6-pack steam gauges.
Yes.
Is that true?
That is true. A 1978 in model.
Oh, yes. You got an ADF in there, too?
I don't even know.
You come on. Well, that's full disclaimer. Tim does not have his instrument rating yet. So you're going to be working on that, though, right?
Yeah, I'm currently working on the instrument. Going to sit for the written by the end of May and then do the rest in the plane. But yeah, man, none of this fancy stuff in the 172. So my stick and rudder skills are sharp.
Good for you.
You know, Tim, I want you to make me a promise right now. I want you to promise me you will request to learn how to execute an ADF approach from your instructor.
Ooh, you got it.
Okay.
I don't even know what I'm gearing.
Exactly.
I'm
Write that
to.
down. Automatic direction finder. I don't care if you have to do it off of an AM radio station with an approach that he makes up. Just
listening to Radio Disney.
Keep us fully updated on this.
So I've committed to that, and I'll let you know how it went.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to introduce you soon as instrument pilot and financial wizard.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, Tim thought he was coming on to give some advice about taxes and regional pilot bonuses, but we're actually going to be quizzing him on
We'll get there.
Yeah, we're quizzing him on the instrument flying handbook for the next 10 minutes, so it's going to be good. We'll start with the service volumes. So welcome back, Tim. April is coming. That means taxes are coming. All of us pilots are now rich. If you haven't seen in the news, we all make a ton of money now, and big tax consequences. So we thought we'd chat with you a little bit and see, what are you seeing out there for professional pilots come tax time?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, at this point, right, we're like T-minus 2 weeks. So for all those procrastinators out there, go ahead and get it done. If you are having some trouble and you need an extension, that's certainly available to you, but you still owe, the taxes. So in terms of what's happening, I mean, the window is closing for folks who haven't made the Roth contributions or the traditional IRA contributions or the spousal contributions, right? You have until April 18th this year in 2023 to go ahead and make those. You guys have heard me say this before, and I'll say it again, but tax planning is really a proactive strategy, right? Like, don't wait until now to then go drop your documents off to your CPA and then understand what you're going to owe. You really owe it to yourself to have a more proactive strategy, because the name of the game is to pay lower lifetime taxes. And that doesn't happen by accident.
That's well said. So you mentioned the Roth contribution stuff. Where are we at maximum income wise? And are you finding ways to help pilots, especially maybe folks that are at the major airlines now, that it might be above the limits? Like, are there still ways to contribute to that?
Really good question. So with that, the max contribution for the Roth IRA in 2023, if you're under 50, is $6,500, right? And so, Dylan, you are correct. There is an income limit that if you earn above, you're not going to be able to go directly into the Roth. So we are helping pilots figure that out. And this little beauty is called the backdoor Roth conversion. You're taking dollars you've already paid taxes on. You're slipping it into a traditional IRA. You're moving it over to a Roth the next day or a few days later with no gains on it. And you're essentially getting into the Roth IRA without having paid any taxes on those dollars, and you can enjoy the tax-free growth. Just be careful, because if you have other old traditional IRAs out there, you can blow the whole strategy up at it and it won't work for you. So just be careful before you run off and you're doing that without doubt.
Okay. Sounds like a professional might be good to bring in to help figure that one out.
The other thing too is most carriers are offering the Roth provision on the 401k. So that's another way to get into it. There is no income limit there. And so you can utilize, and it has a much larger maximum contribution, $22,500 if you're under 50 in 2023. So those are your two options there.
Like for the pilots that you work with at the majors, and they have the regular option and the Roth option for the 401k, is it, like, generally speaking, are you sending most pilots towards the Roth option, or are there times when the Roth option is not a good idea?
Ooh, I love that question. And it really depends, right? So if I can take a step back, last year I came on and I beat the drum pretty hard about, if you're a super saver, the old traditional rules of thumb do not apply, which is defer as much. So take a pre-tax deduction now, let that grow, and then you'll be in a lower bracket later in retirement. And I told you, if you're a super saver, that does not apply to you. What I want to be abundantly clear, though, is that you might find yourself going back and forth. So Dylan, like you're asking, hey, are the majority Roth or the majority traditional? And it depends. If you're in a major early in your career, it may be Roth. And let's say you're single, you're early in your career, maybe Roth. Let's say you get married, your spouse has a large income, and next thing you know, you've jumped a couple tax brackets, right? We might switch to traditional, or the opposite happens. You're doing really well, spouse, you get divorced, you're back to the single bracket, but now you're way up, right? So all of those, as you move through life, your circumstances will dictate. We're asking ourselves every year, what am I willing to pay in tax? Am I going to be in a higher tax bracket in the future? Do I expect to be in a lower tax bracket in the future? And then I make my decision. So it's not a set it and forget it strategy when you choose Roth versus traditional. It really depends on what's going on in your life at that time.
Well said.
Yeah.
Again, like the name of the game is lower lifetime taxes. So I'm preaching to the choir. Flexibility is the key of what? Exactly. So flexibility is the key to tax planning in this case. But now I have given advice where there's a higher tax consequence now, a little higher tax bill now. In exchange, it's designed to really ease a substantial tax burden in the future, right? So the short answer there is it depends.
Okay. Well, Tim, this stuff, it seems very complex, and that's, I guess, where you come in. Like I tell all the pilots, everyone stick to doing what they're good at. So, go pick up an open time trip or something like that. Don't try and save money on the planning, and let our boy Tim take care of you.
Yeah.
Let him do what he does, and you do what you do. Everybody's much happier.
That's right. I always think whenever I break your rule, because I always break it, like this last time I was like putting a drain in. It was awful. What am I doing? It's cold out here. And then like when I was done, I looked at the drain and the water has to jump up half an inch to get into said drain. Oh, this is so then I bring my buddy over who's a civil engineer and I'm just like embarrassed. Like, dude, can you help me fix it? So totally. But I will say on the tax planning piece again, if you're retired military, you're retiring with full benefits and you got another 20 to 23 years in the game and you're going to the airlines, pay attention, right? Like you're going to have Social Security, you got the pension, plus you're going to have 401k and TSP distributions. So build it with intention. Don't just like throw it at the wall because that's not how you end up paying lower lifetime taxes. So I just wanted to give a shout out to my military guys because they still have pensions. It's something to think about.
All right, let's take a quick break to mention our sponsor, Harvey Watt.
Our sponsor and friend, Harvey Watt, the largest provider of loss of license insurance in the business. If you don't have it and you're a pro, you need it. HarveyWatt.com. Look them up.
Check it out. What's really cool, Max, we've talked about this before. They have that online tool that you can just fill out your age and everything else, how much coverage you want for your loss of medical certificate. It spits you out a price right there so you can get a really good idea. Guess what? If you're a business aviation professional, that'd be a nice little thing to throw into your next compensation package negotiation. HarveyWatt.com. Protect yourself. Okay, back to the show. Another topic, Tim, that Max and I addressed last episode, we had a pilot write in that was at a regional airline, and they're in this big conundrum, a hot topic for a lot of regional pilots right now, which is, should I stay at my regional or should I go to a low-cost carrier and try and kind of do an end around to get to the major airline? So we looked at it more from the lens of what's the best from your experience standpoint and kind of from a hiring standpoint. But one thing we kind of neglected to mention was the retention bonus stuff that some regional airline pilots get. It written in and said, hey, there is another thing to look at. So can you talk a little bit about these retention bonuses and what you're seeing out there and the consequences folks might have to deal with?
Yeah. So great question. And with the retention bonuses, like for the pilot who wrote in for your last show, like just like to bring what he was dealing with. Hey, I'm at a wholly owned. I'm thinking to go to a low cost carrier and then come back to American. He's in Charlotte, by the way. So shout out to whoever he is in Charlotte. So with that, he probably took bonus money with these retention bonuses. And some, like, I'll just say for Piedmont, for example, and not all of them work this way, but we'll talk about Piedmont. With the retention bonuses with Piedmont, you can get a bonus. It could be 15 grand. It could be 30 or 40 grand. And so you get that bonus in year one. We'll call it year one when you receive it. But then the bonus has a 2-year tail. Meaning, if you leave, you've got to pay that bonus back immediately within 30 days. But if you leave within 2 years of receiving that bonus, and then the next year, they're going to give you another bonus. And then the third year, they'll give you another bonus after that.
Do each of those have a 2-year tail individually?
Each of them have a 2-year tail. Correct. So if you find yourself maybe 2 years after having received the first bonus, it's not far-fetched that you owe the company $90,000. And what I advise pilots to do is just be aware of that, number one. Number two, don't assume the company's not going to come after you. I mean, this is the reason they put the retention bonus in the first place, is to retain you. So if we have pilots leaving, they're going to come. So the agreement says, hey, you owe the company all of the money within 30 days of leaving. They're not looking at accepting payment plans. Maybe.
They might take boat trade-ins?
Yeah. Can you trade your boat in that you bought?
With other assets, I'm not sure. But the language just say, hey, we want the funds. Now, remember, you've gotten this bonus, but they've taken tax out of the bonus.
Ooh.
And then they're going to want that tax money back too. So the way I'm advising clients is number one, let's understand it. Let's be aware of it. Let's understand what we're going to owe. Do we have cash on hand? If we do, that's pretty easy. If we don't, where are we going to get the cash? Do we have to borrow it? And what is that going to cost us? Do we have to sell something from our portfolio? If so, what should we sell? What's going to be the tax impact, right? To raise that cash. And the other thing is I tell folks, hey, let's plot this out so we can understand like when your break even point is going to be. Probably you're going to break even over time, but sometimes it just doesn't feel good to take a hit like on the front end. You want to know where you're going to break even and where this was worth it. So we plot that out as well.
Man, that's a lot of considerations. And on top of all this, let's keep in mind that the people that are probably taking this bonus are what? 21, 22, 23. Probably what's not on their mind is, I should consult a financial planner, and they're more like, wow, sweet, 30 grand. Great. I'm 200 grand in debt for school. So this is a great way to pay my loans off.
I'd say the average age of a pilot that needs to seek financial advice is coming down rapidly.
Yeah.
You've got that right. You make a really good point, Dylan, is, hey, I got these other obligations. This money came in. And so I pay for it. But if you're thinking about, let's say you've already spent the first bonus and now you're just seeing how things are moving so rapidly and bonus time is approaching and you're thinking about leaving the company. It's not like you can write in and say, hey, I don't want to be part of the bonus program anymore. At least not that I'm aware of. Maybe a listener knows about that. But what you can do is save the bonus, right? Put that baby in the bank. Do not touch it because you're going to, that's a part of what you're going to be giving back.
Everybody's different, obviously, but I mean, we're talking like probably between 15 and 20% tax on that bonus. Would you say? Is that a ballpark? Yeah. So it's a significant amount of extra cash you've got to come up with to get it out of that.
Mind you, I don't tell people not to go to the new carrier. That's not my lane. I don't give career advice, but I will make folks smart about the financial impact of, their career moves.
Yeah. I think you just get the credit card, right? Can you just swipe the credit card to pay off the bonus? Think about the air miles. Oh, man. That's a lot to think about. Wow. Well, okay. You say take the cash and put it in the bank if you can. But Tim, all the banks are insolvent. I don't know if you've been reading the news. So
all the banks are insolvent, Tim. Yeah, I don't know if you missed that.
So that's a problem. That could be a problem.
I missed that headline too, that all of the banks have become insolvent. But.
Yeah. So Tim, if you could just take about 30 seconds to explain the financial crisis to all of our listeners and what the solution is and what we should all do with our money. If you could just do that quickly in the next 10 seconds. Go ahead.
Gold.
Oh my gosh. What a time to be alive. In the markets. Holy cow. With all this volatility, I mean, there is fear though, right? In all seriousness, and these things kind of ebb and flow. And so I think that's when it is nice to have a trusted co-pilot watching over your assets because things change. I mean, it seems like every time we talk to you, there's something new or something different. And it's like you studying for the instrument written right now, that the instrument regulations are always changing. And as pilots, it's our jobs to stay up on the latest regs and changes with the ops manual and everything like that. And that's why we need somebody like you that's doing the same thing in the financial markets. So we really appreciate your insight on that.
You're absolutely right. We're that trusted partner, right? To help the pilot and their family. We like to say helping professional pilots make the most out of life with great financial outcomes, right? So, you fly the jet, you make the money, and we just help you with aligning your why with the dollars that you've earned.
The fastest way to get a boat is to work with Tim. And that's the goal of all pilots is to own a boat.
And not feel guilty about it.
Yeah, and not feel guilty about it. A guilt-free boat with Tim. I love it.
Well, that's for sure. I thought you were going to say go fly at Delta, but
Tim, of course, all of your information is in the show notes. You can book a free appointment to talk with Tim and get something on his calendar. And Tim is an expert. At this point, you're probably talking to pilots at most airlines, I would say, right? So you're starting to get familiar with all of the different retirement options at the different majors and even some of the regionals, right? So you're kind of familiar with all the intricacies of all of it. What would you say? I'll put you on the spot here, Tim. Of all the kind of packages you've seen from the different airlines, is there one that you're like, wow, this one's really good?
Oh, I thought you were going to make me say the one that's really bad.
Oh, no. That too.
Yeah, I am a big fan of the new contract that Delta has for obvious reasons. I mean, they're by goodness, 2026, I think we're looking at 18% direct contribution, where they're also revamped their loss of medical insurance, which is just top of line there. And then the other thing with the cash balance plan. So that's another way for pilots to get deferred. So we talked about if you're a captain, you're killing the 401k plus the direct contributions really quickly. And so here's another way to get tax deferred savings. And that might change a little bit of the economics, depending on how much some of the projected earnings in that plan is. Might change a little of the economics of their Roth versus their traditional decision making. But I do like the Delta plan.
Okay. Go to Delta and you'll get the boat the fastest. That's the takeaway from today.
For now. Yeah, and as it'll change as the rest of the chips fall this year, it'll be really interesting to watch, huh?
Very interesting. Buy gold.
Somebody wrote in like the other day and was asking like, hey, like what have you seen in terms of they wanted to maximize their earnings, right? They're transitioning from the military to airlines and they've got Delta United kind of going. And I said, look, honestly, the pay is going to converge. Like we're seeing it right now in real time. And so this is why a lot of the talk is on quality of life, because your pay, you can make a lot of money anywhere, but then are you happy? Are you available to spend that money and do what it means, with your family? So
next question is, where do you want to live?
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, I have one more question for Tim. We asked this of last time when we had Joel on too, and he got a real interesting response. And now I'm just curious, Tim, since you're a pilot also, if you could fly one airplane, what would it be?
Well,
if you say PC-12, I'm walking away. Just
all right. Well, look. I listened to that show, and Joel can sit in right seat when I fly the PC-12. Like that. Matter of fact, I was at the airport last night, and my kids were like, "Hey!" Then there was one taking off. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the PC-12, man. I have 4 kids. Like,
you're gonna tell me that that's the one airplane you would fly? Are you being serious right now?
Dude, I'm content, man. Like, I want the PC-12. I want to throw the kids in the back. And
that's not to own. Just if you could fly once without history being a limitation. I get owning one. I have dreaming. That's a much bigger dream than if you could fly any airplane.
Oh, okay. All right. If I could fly any, I'm probably a naval aviator in the Blue Angels demonstration squad. That's what I'm doing.
Oh,
if I could fly any.
Thank you. That's
Max approved.
I was just about to throw my headphones down and walk away. Okay. I was like, one of anything? Really? And now I get if you want to, that's the dream, to own one and throw your kids in the back and,
We've got to have a listener with access to a PC-12. They can pick up Tim in Charlotte and then swing by Columbus, pick up
We're going to call
Joel.
it the Pity PC-12.
Yeah, they'll have a great little victory tour with the Pilatus crew. It'll be awesome.
I am so down.
All right, Tim. We always love talking to you. Appreciate it. All your contact info in the show notes. Reach out and get some great advice from Tim. Thanks Tim. Good talking to you, Tim.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Always great to hear from Diamond Dog #1, Tim Pope. All his contact info is in the show notes. Time to craft a strategy financially. And then, speaking of strategy, James is, of course, our career strategy master. So we're going to bring him in to talk a little bit about strategy at the regional level.
Let's go. Full turtleneck.
Full turtleneck.
Here we go.
Let's go.
And now, our friend, esteemed cohort, the sorcerer of career advice, James Onieal. Welcome back to the show, James.
I feel like that's a lot to live up to now. I'm kind of getting nervous.
James is in front of his cauldron right now. He's dropped some rat legs in.
I know people can't see it, but here's my magic wand.
Yeah. Did you just pull a selfie stick out?
It is. It's a selfie stick, man.
James is conjuring up a new spell to get the 250-hour commercial pilots hired at regional airlines.
Actually, I'm trying to get one of our mutual esteemed colleagues to let me in on his partnership in a 340.
That will sink things quick. That's a new red flag. We know pilots are making too much money in the industry right now. They're buying twin Cessnas.
Exactly.
Twin Cessnas.
Trouble. James, welcome back. We've got you back for a couple of different topics we wanted to hit with you today. We'll hit some career stuff in the beginning and then transition onto some more technical talk in the second half of our conversation with you. Yeah, should be great.
Yeah, I love tech talk.
Thank you for coming to my tech talk. So we have been getting a ton of emails on regional airline pilot strategy, especially when it comes to should I stay at my regional? I'm very comfortable here, or should I go to a low-cost carrier to accelerate my chances of getting hired at a major? And Max and I have tried to give some advice, but we realize we don't understand some of the nuance, especially at like wholly owned carriers versus independent regional carriers and all that kind of stuff. So just wanted to see if you could help us out and kind of understand different scenarios for regional airline pilots and they need to consider.
Look, it really depends on the why they want to make the move. If you're looking for it to be a shortcut to the legacies, you can definitely accomplish that. One of the things that we teach in our LinkedIn networking course is how to use LinkedIn to find other pilots at different carriers. And, right before we got on, I was doing some searching on LinkedIn, and I just used Delta as an example because they've got their brand new contract. And I took a look at Frontier pilots and Spirit pilots that were at Frontier, Spirit, and now at Delta. You'd be surprised how many people were at Spirit or Frontier for between 6 and 18 months before they went to Delta. And the same is true when you take a look at Southwest, when you take a look at Delta, United, American, and you see people go to ultra low cost carriers and then they end up jumping over to a legacy carrier. So that's a definite strategy. Sorry,
I feel like the problem, say you're a regional dude and you got a job with a regional carrier that has a base in a city where you grew up, right? Let's say we had a guy in Charlotte, right? So he works for an American wholly owned carrier. And so now he wants to work for American so he could continue to live where he wants to live and be based there, right? So it's kind of like these handcuffs that these guys are on. And now, but that's also an obstacle because going to that carrier is difficult because they're throttling the hiring and all. So what do you tell that person?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. And that's why I started off with the ultra low cost carriers in terms of, I know a lot of people are using those as a shortcut to go jump to a legacy. The variable that you got to think about with that, though, is, man, are you going to have to commute someplace else now? I mean, are you going to take a dramatic drop in quality of life? Have you had trouble in training before? Because you're about to go through a different training program again, right? So remember, every time you go to a new carrier, you have the chance of a potential career bust on your record or a check ride bust on your record. But the other thing that people don't think about is if the music were to stop, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying we can talk about hiring numbers in a little bit if you guys want to, but there's nothing indicating the hiring is slowing down right now. Right? Yeah,
they always say, James.
Yeah, right. No, listen.
No, I'm pretty sure if we go back, we had the same conversation a few years ago, right before
we did. I think there's a couple of episodes of the three of us crying together. But my point is that they hire until they furlough. And so one of the questions that I always ask people to ask themselves is, hey man, if you got stuck there, right? Would you rather be stuck at an ultra low cost or would you rather be stuck at a regional? Now, if someone's going to commute to an ultra low cost versus commute to a regional, there's a lot of people that go, hey man, I'd rather stick it out at an ultra low cost. But if you have a good life at a regional, right? You're living in base, you're making, look, let's face it. I love it when I talk to people now and they're like, man, I'm willing to suck up the regional airline pay. I'm like, suck up the regional airline pay. What are you sucking up?
Get slapped? Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing to suck up anymore. I mean, so let's face it. Regional airline pilots are paid well. And most are making 6 figures. If you're sitting in base, right? And you've got a line, you really got to ask yourself, why am I leaving this? Because kind of like buying houses. I bought a house in 2007 that was supposed to be a starter house. I think I was supposed to own it for, it was like 12 or 18 or whatever, 24 months. And then I was going to get rid of it. Yeah. 10 years later, I was still in my starter house because, I bought like right before the economy tanked. And so you really got to ask yourself that hey, look, if I was going to get stuck, where would I want to be stuck? Would I want to be stuck at the regional? Would I want to be stuck at the ultra low cost? Now, a couple things for the ultra low cost to consider. The 3 carriers that people typically are referencing when they're talking about ultra low cost are Frontier, Spirit, and Allegiant, right? Spirit is going through a merger right now. Now, they are, if you guys subscribe to our emails, you will have seen 2 articles recently. One of them where Spirit and JetBlue are getting sued by the DOJ. And the second one where JetBlue just made their first payment on Spirit. So point is, we don't know if the merger is going to go through or not. There's still some unknowns there. And if the merger goes through, is Spirit going to become JetBlue or is JetBlue going to become Spirit? I think all indications are pointing to right now Spirit's going to become JetBlue.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Job has got to go. He likes bananas flying. It's weird.
Nobody wants to fly a school bus. So the point is we could lose an ultra low cost carrier. So when we take a look at somebody that wants to go to a Spirit, you have to ask yourself, how comfortable are you with risk? Right? And depending on what your comfortability with risk is and what you want for your career in life, going to Spirit honestly could be the best decision you've ever made. It could also be a very bad decision. So I wouldn't arbitrarily.
That's any move in aviation though, right? You just don't know.
Not necessarily though, because if you're leaving a regional with the intention of going to a legacy and you know for a fact you actually don't want to stay at, let's say Spirit, and you go there thinking that, hey man, this is going to be a great lily pad to springboard me, and something happens and you get stuck there, dude, you could be in for a world of hurt. If you're going to make that move, you really got to think through, am I okay with being stuck there? Versus when you take a look at a Frontier or an Allegiant, you know what you're getting, right? They're not shifting their business model. Yes, Frontier is making some adjustments in terms of shortening up their trips to be more 1 and 2 day trips as opposed to 3 and 4 day trips. So commuting can be a little bit more difficult depending on where you're looking to go. But you've really got to ask yourself, hey, look, before I go make this jump, would I be comfortable staying there for 5 years? If the answer is no, you really got to ask yourself, hey, look, why am I doing this?
Go back to the scenario I painted with the person in Charlotte, right? That's been at the regional and he can't get a call from American because he's American wholly owned and he's frustrated. And how much time do you really, assuming that the music doesn't stop here, how much time do you really save by going to an ultra low cost carrier and kind of doing that roundabout route versus just waiting alternative? I mean, I know you can't tell me for sure.
Try and get it down to the day, James.
It's a fair question. And that's why I said, when you take a look at, like I said, you can very unscientifically go to LinkedIn, go to Delta Airlines. You have to do this on a desktop. Click on the People tab, and there's a secondary search window that's going to pop up for keyword. Type in Spirit, then delete it, type in Frontier, and click on all the profiles and see how long were they at Spirit or Frontier before they went to Delta. You're going to notice it's between 6 and 18 months. Now, it's like the stock market. I can't tell you that past performance is going to dictate future performance, but it's not a lie. You can very reasonably see between 6 and 18 months is a pretty good average to expect.
But I'm saying, how much longer would it take if you didn't make that move and you just waited at the wholly owned carrier? Like,
that's the variable. And you can see it right now. The legacy airlines are bleeding through the amount of people that are on their applications. And they're having to make very, very, very difficult decisions now based on production capacity. So we've had a recent uptick in clients calling up that are on the lower end of the flight time spectrum. So the restricted ATP to 1,500 hour ATP folks that are frustrated. They're like, man, I can't get any of these regionals to call me right now. What's going on? There's a hiring blitz. What's the matter with me? Problem's not you. The problem is every one of these regionals has a shortage of captains. And that's why you're seeing companies like SkyWest and Endeavor are coming out and saying, if you meet 121 PIC minimums and you are not in the left seat, they're effectively forcing an upgrade on you. And the reason is they're basically having to park airplanes because they don't have enough captains to fly them. So they have the airplanes, they have the traffic demand, they have the FOs, but they don't have enough captains. And so you're seeing folks at the bottom of the spectrum. It's now effectively easier to get a job at United, Delta, American, and Southwest than it is at Endeavor, Spirit, or Endeavor, SkyWest, or Republic. So this is why I bring up that concept of, hey, think about what you're going to do if you get stuck there, because it gets stupid very quickly. So now you're at a regional. If you're an FO, the legacies can pull you out of the regional, and they're helping the regional right now. They're overstaffed on FOs anyway, right? Or they can very easily replace the FOs. The problem is the captains are very difficult to take right now because every one of those they pull from the regional, they now got a jet parked on the ground. So when you ask, hey, if someone's looking to leave a regional and go to a legacy, there's a little bit of variability, and depending on if you're a captain or first officer as to what that looks like. We watch all this data on the back end, and it's absolutely crazy when you start seeing all of a sudden you get 10 phone calls and people are like, I can't get any of the regionals to call me. And you're like, hold on a second. And we get on the phone and start making phone calls. You're like, oh yeah, almost none of them are hiring FOs right now. Wow. You know, so depending on where you're at that regional, it may be easier or harder for you to leave and go to a legacy.
So I guess that leads me into this next question, which is, if I'm a flight instructor, I'm about to be at 1,500 hours. Let's set some of this hiring stuff aside. But like, if I'm looking at multiple regionals, and do you not want to go to a wholly owned? Does that matter anymore? Is there strategy in there to like avoid being stuck?
Yeah. So what we're effectively talking about right now is, do you want to be in one of their flow through programs? So,
yeah.
You know, at American, they're called a wholly owned, right? At United, it's an Aviate partner. At Delta, it's, you know, basically their Propel programs. Southwest is Destination 225. And so that's going to vary a bit by carrier. So folks may have noticed recently, United came out with their Aviate program where they're trying to do some streamlining to speed people up getting to the legacy carrier, right? Because there's been a perception, probably rightfully so, that if you go to one of those Aviate partners, it's going to slow down your progression. And the problem is, if the carriers throttle people for long periods of time, it actually has an opposite negative effect on people going into those flow-through programs. One could certainly make a very strong argument that if you want to go to United, you're better off going to an American regional. If you want to go to American, you're better off going to a United regional, vice versa, right? The problem is everything is changing so quickly that I can tell you that's what's happening now, but I can't tell you that's what's going to be happening 6 months from now.
That's what's happening now, but you can't plan on anything.
Yeah. Well, you can't, because the other thing that people aren't factoring in is they're thinking that because there's so much hiring going on. I mean, just to give you an idea, in the month of January, between United, Delta, American, and Southwest, 907 pilots were hired just by those 4 carriers. There were 751 pilots hired in February between United, Delta, American, and Southwest. It's just 4 carriers. We're not talking about Frontier. We're not talking about Spirit. We're not talking about JetBlue or Atlas. We're not talking about any of those other carriers, right? Just those 4 carriers are hiring that many pilots in a month. And so people are thinking, oh, they're hiring so much, the interviews must be getting easier. And what they're getting surprised by is how many people are getting bounced out of interviews for failing.
Too. It's surprising because you would think that the success rate would be really high, but it's not, I learned.
Well, what people are making the mistake of thinking is they're thinking that they're letting more people through, as opposed to what they're doing is just sending you home. And instead of waiting a year to call you back to interview, they call you back in 6 months. Or instead of waiting a year, they're calling you back in 3 months. So they'll still reject you and send you home. They'll just call you back quicker. We had a guy we worked with the other day bounced out of 4 interviews, because people get really nervous about interview prep because won't name names, but we have some competitors out there that script the ever-living daylights out of you. And so people think like, oh, hey, just go in and be yourself. That's like showing up to an FAA check ride and going, just be yourself. Like, what are you kidding me? You're going to show up to a private instrument or commercial check ride without doing any instruction with an instructor? The difference in interview prep is like when you go to one of those pilot mills where they just teach to the check ride versus teaching you how to fly, versus you go to a place where they actually teach you how to fly an airplane and then you pass the check ride, right? That's the difference between good and bad interview prep. Bad interview prep scripting is no different than going to a pilot mill where they just go, here, I'm going to do the check ride with you 50 times in a row, and then we're going to sign you off and maybe you pass, maybe you don't, versus just going to a good flight school, getting a good instructor and having them teach you how to fly. But guys are showing up to these interviews with this attitude of like, oh, it's your job to lose. They need you more than you need them. And they're getting bounced out of the interviews and they're like, holy smokes, I can't believe that just happened. We've had guys at legacy carriers go and interview at other legacy carriers and fail the interview. And they call us up and they're like, what the hell? And I go, hey man, did you kind of walk in with an entitled attitude? And they're like, well, yeah. But then they go in and they're like, all right, I'm taking it seriously this time. And then we get them the job. So it's not easier.
I mean, especially now you were mentioning, James, that the interview process maybe hasn't caught up 100% with the candidate level of experience. Can you talk a little bit about like how people, especially with lower time, can struggle with that?
Sure. So at a very, very, very simple level, right? The interviewers have a very basic metric. Can I fly 4 days with you without wanting to gouge my eyeball out with the dull spoon? That's the metric for any interview is, can I do a 4-day with you and not want to vomit? Okay. So there are 2 basic methodologies that the airlines use for that. The first one is tell me about a time questions. They are an exceptionally good way to score cultural fit. Because everybody's always going to walk in and go, no, I'm a great communicator. No, I get along with people, right? No, I'm a fun guy. They're always going to spew that garbage. Tell me about a time story forces you to show me, hey, when you say good communicator, what does that mean? And they tell you a story where they talk to someone louder and slower, and you're like, that's not good communication, right? Okay. So tell me about a time stories is one way they do that. And the second way they do it is when they're bringing in lower time or younger pilots. A really good example is Delta historically has brought in younger pilots, right? Tell me about a time stories don't always fit. People won't necessarily have as many stories, right? Just because they're younger. So what they do though is they'll give you scenario-based questions. So instead of tell me about a time you had to motivate people, which if you're 25 or 26, you may never have had to have done that. Doesn't mean you're a bad pilot. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. You just may have not had that opportunity yet. They might give you a scenario-based question that says, hey, look, flight attendant comes up and says, we got some passengers in first class that are getting rowdy. They're drunk and the flight attendant wants them kicked off the airplane. And so what they do is instead of saying, tell me a story about a time you did this, they say, walk me through a scenario about how you would do this. Well, the problem is as they're bringing in pilots now with lower and lower and lower flight time, right? Maybe the person has 2,000 hours total time. They only have 500 hours of 121 as an FO. Not only do they not have the tell me about a time stories, they don't have enough exposure to things going wrong. So when they get the scenario-based questions, they can't explain clearly why they're making the decisions that they're making. So we're noticing when we're doing the tell me about a time prep, we're spending a lot more time going through people's backgrounds and helping them. When they can't think of a question for a story, we can give them 20 or 30 examples and it'll jog their memory. We're getting a lot more creative with using outside the cockpit stories, non-flying stories that fit perfectly well. And then when we're going into the scenario-based questions, we're spending a lot more time with people teaching decision-making.
That's what I was going to ask. It's the skill. You're teaching the person how to fish in a sense, right?
Precisely, because the thing is, what people don't understand is when you go into these scenario-based interviews, as the person being interviewed, you have as much control over how this goes as the interviewer. The interviewer gets a card with a scenario. Flight attendant comes up, says there's drunk passengers in first class. What are you going to do, right? Or in Southwest example, there's just drunk people on the airplane, right? And, once that interviewer reads that scenario, they're now purely reacting to what you do. So they don't know where it's going to go either. And so a lot of people struggle. They don't know what resources they have available to them. They don't know when they should pull those resources in. How do they pull those resources in? How do they get those resources to work together? And when you have disagreement on the crew, how do you work through that and make a decision? Even if someone may not agree with you, how do you listen to them, take in their input, and then disagree with them in a way that keeps them engaged? And that's what we're spending a lot more time in interview prep teaching people. Whereas before, we would just run you through scenarios, right? And if you had 5, 7, 10,000 hours, you just needed exposure to what types of scenarios are they running. So you run them through the scenario, and then we just kind of take pot shots at you while you're doing it. And then, okay, cool, rewind the tape, let's do that again, right? Now it's completely different. Now it's, okay, cool, here's how to use dispatch, right? Okay, here's how to talk to a flight attendant. Here's how to disagree with a first officer without being disagreeable. And then they can at least go in and, we're having 2,000, 3,000 hour pilots that are just killing it in the interview because they understand how to think through the problem. They understand not just what is the question the recruiter is asking, but, and this is really important on the tell me about a times and the scenarios, why are they asking the question? You really have to understand why are they asking the question in the first place before you open your mouth and start talking.
That sounds good. Sounds like good advice.
What a world.
It's a very different ballgame.
Yeah. It's
very different.
Even in business aviation, I was just talking to some folks at Hire, and they are doing that now, scenario-based stuff. And I think it really is. I was just talking to a friend, and he just started throwing me some examples of questions. And the first one, we kind of went through it, and we're like, oh, yeah, we were kind of talking about it. But it's like the wheels started spinning in my head. And then it was like when the next one came, it's like you're kind of in that mode. I don't know how to explain it, but it's sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of see the game here, and then so it's just sort of like you need a little batting practice sometimes to get in that mindset.
It is, but you got to remember, it's easy to get in the mindset when you've been in an FBO and somebody's actually screamed at you before.
Yeah.
It's not easy to get in that mindset if you've never physically had someone scream at you. Or if you've never been in the situation where you've flown with somebody and you're like, my God, this person's making horrible decisions faster than I can process mentally. He's not stopping, right? It's not getting better. And so when you've been in that situation, you can actually visualize that in the interview and you recall previous experience. But if you got 500 hours in a jet or a turboprop and you were lucky and got paired with somebody that was actually a mentor, you may never have had a situation where someone turned to you and went, hey, do me a favor, before you share your ideas, do you mind just pulling the microphone away from your face so I don't have to listen to it? Right? Or hey, can you do me a favor? Can you just unplug your headset next time before you share your opinions? When you're like, how do I deal with that? We are having to consistently adapt our training techniques to what's going on in the environment.
It sounds like every few months, the airlines are shifting what they need. It's like this dynamic target they're chasing. So
they are. And the recruiters are having a lot of difficulty because when we talk to them, they're asking questions that tell me about a time you had to make a decision that wasn't guided by a policy or procedure. That's like kind of not a difficult question if you've had enough time to make some bad decisions, right? But recruiters are asking questions where literally the person does not have a story and the recruiter doesn't know how to react. They're just not used to it. So And you got to remember, there's a delay between when they see the issue and they can figure out what to do about it. So you may do an interview pool of 20 people that day. And I've heard recruiters, hey, we interviewed 19, we sent 13 home. And so you're like, okay, cool. So now the next day you bring everyone in, you go, brought in another 19, sent another 12 home. It may take a week or 2 weeks of sending people home before you figure out, wait a second, these 4 questions are where we're losing them. Now we got to reword the questions again. But it may take 100 or 200 pilots, which sounds like a lot, but that's like 2 weeks of interviewing. So you went in thinking, hey, I'm going to go be myself. I don't need any interview prep. Yeah, smart idea. And so because you don't understand why they're asking what they're asking, you don't understand the psychology behind it, you can't adapt in the interview. That's the big thing that we're teaching people is when you get into the interview, how do you adapt on the fly? And so now all of a sudden people go home dumbfounded and they tanked an interview. Well, guess what? People are getting 2 or 3 interviews at a time. So now back to back to back, they go into 3 interviews in a row and they get sent home. And really what was happening is the carriers were changing what they were doing. Versus us, I'm getting daily reports from dozens of pilots from every one of the carriers. Here's exactly what I was asked. Hey, when the recruiter asked this and we did this, and then the recruiter is confused, but I changed this and then it connected. There's a lot more to this than, hey, go online, read the questions, memorize the question, come up with a story. I mean, you could do that if you want to. It's just not going to be very effective.
So to put a bow on this, the answer to our previous question about regional airline LCC strategy, it depends, right?
It does, but the usually the biggest deciding factors are if you're single and you don't have children, you have the freedom to go make the decision, take the risk, no big deal, right? That actually kind of becomes a very easy decision. Where it becomes complicated is if the person has a partner or children. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm not the only one that suffers if this doesn't work out. I tell all my friends this, your kids don't care who you fly for. They don't care what airplane you fly. They don't even care you're a pilot. They care that you make softball games, baseball games, music recitals, that you're there when they fall down and scrape their knee. They care that you're there for Christmas. They care you're there for Thanksgiving, that you're there for the first time they rode a bike. If you have kids that are 5 or 6 and you're about to go make a jump to a low-cost carrier and you take a 1 or 2 year disruption to your quality of life, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, if you're 20 or 30 or 40, 2 years is not that big of a deal. To a 6-year-old, that's a lot of their life. You just missed out on a third of their life. Right. So that's where it becomes complicated is when you have a family.
Well, and I think something else you said too, it's if you're going to be very unhappy staying there, if the music stops, then you need to take a hard look at that decision because in this business, no matter how crazy things continue to go and the retirement numbers and everything, like you still have to plan the music could stop wherever you're at and don't go somewhere that's miserable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I can tell you exactly what's going to happen in the industry looking backwards.
Yeah.
If anyone tells you they know what's going to happen in the future, they're lying. I say this talking to the recruiters. You talk to people that are making the hiring decisions and they're like, here's our plan. And next week it's like completely different. You're like, how the hell did you change that?
Like, they're one email away from a complete 180 of that plan, from somebody above them.
We're going to go target all these people. And then they go do it. And they're all of a sudden 3 weeks later, 300 pilot candidates here. That didn't work. Now we're going to make a 90-degree right turn. You're like, what? So the plans are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of volatility.
Well, I think what you said is so valid, though. It's like it's really teaching like critical decision making, thinking skills. That's the kind of stuff that you can prepare because that's the only way you can hedge against this because airlines are going to change what they're looking for. And, you may not know.
Yeah. Going online and reading questions or talking to your buddies is like skating to where the puck was. Knock yourself out. But you're constantly going to be like, one stick length away from where you should have been.
Yeah. Never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
There you go. Hey, go and be yourself. Give us a call when it's done. We'll help you fix that.
All right. Well, James, we want to shift gears a little bit. We've talked to you so many times on the show, but we've never talked to you really about what you do in an airplane. And what is it you say you do around here? And,
what is exactly you do?
Yeah. And so you've got a pretty unique job and we want to learn more about it. So can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a pilot that's working in like certifying nav aids and flying approaches and what's all that?
Yeah. So in my normal day-to-day life, I shoot about 96 ILS approaches a day, 5 days a week. So I do ILS, VOR, lighting system certifications. That's my bread and butter. So I take a King Air with 4 seats on board and about 5,000 pounds of computer equipment. And we go out and fly approaches over and over and over looking for towers that nobody put on a map, looking for... Remember when you were in flight training and you were like horrible at flying VOR approaches? Turns out it wasn't always you.
That's funny.
I fly so many approaches now. 80% of the flying that we do is hand flown.
Okay.
We've got to fly to basically the width of the needle. And the autopilot can't always do that. And so you'd be surprised how many times you figure let's say for an ILS, we do like 10 or 11 approaches per ILS.
How do you know how many you're going to do? Do you call it quits, or do you have to like check so many boxes, or how do you decide how many approaches you're going to fly?
Yeah, so we actually have a standard checklist of a minimum amount of things that we need to do. So you ever been getting vectored onto a localizer and you're like 20 degrees off course, you're on that vector, and all of a sudden the autopilot catches it and you're like, wait, what? And then it like starts zigzagging all over the place. Yeah, that's one of the things we're checking for. So we'll fly these 10 DME arcs across the localizer, check in for how wide the localizer is. Does it capture at the right point versus the wrong point? And so we have a minimum number of checklist items that we have to do to recertify that. And then we have a specific interval on how often we certify that. Now, if any of those individual checks fail, we then go into a separate set of checklist items that we have to do to recertify the system to a tighter standard. So if we go out and, for example, one of the things we check is the width of a localizer. So if the localizer is too wide, the needle's really not going to be very sensitive. You could be 3 miles off course and show 1 dot off. If it's too sensitive, right, or too narrow, it's going to be too sensitive, and you're going to be, the autopilot's going to be chasing that needle the whole way down. So let's say we go out and we check the localizer width and it's too narrow or it's too wide. We're going to go back and forth across that localizer over and over and over and over until they get it right.
Like, so you mean, so there's a dude down in the shack, like with a screwdriver, like adjusting the Phillips head down?
Yeah.
To widen and look. Because really the ILS is actually a fairly archaic system.
It is.
Standards. It's just.
They're adjusting power settings. The reason why we're there is, so let's say the localizer is supposed to be 3 degrees wide, and we go out and it's 5 degrees wide. All they know is the power setting they had. We tell them, hey, it's 5 degrees wide. They have a mathematical calculation on how much they should adjust the power. They make that adjustment. We go back out again and go, hey, yeah, it's intolerance or it's not intolerance. But they're using mathematical calculations based on how the system's supposed to perform. But guess what? That calculation doesn't account for some dude that put a barn out there with a metal roof. And now it's reflecting the signal all over the place.
Yeah, because what's interesting is in the ILS, from what I understand, it's very sensitive as far as the system's emitting the signal. The receiving end on the airplane is essentially a voltmeter.
Yeah, it's an ammeter.
The signal is inducing a voltage, and that's how it decides which way to swing the needle, depending on how much voltage from the 90 and whatever the 150 kilohertz signals. And so, so you have to have those things adjusted dead nuts on.
Yep.
So the needle indicates correctly, right?
Precisely correct. But there's all these environmental factors. So like if you're ever flying into Indianapolis, 2-3 left, I think it is, you got the FedEx ramp over there. You're going to get different signals depending on if they're loading all those airplanes that day or if the airplanes are off the ground. Remember, it's a whole bunch of metal tubes with a whole bunch of metal cargo bins, right? That stuff starts to affect that signal. When we go out, that's what we're checking for. But the guy on the ground doesn't know what impact his adjustments are going to have. So as they're making screwdriver adjustments, which honestly, they have a computer system now and they just type into the computer and it makes all the adjustments. But we call it screwdrivering. As they're down there screwdrivering, we're going back and forth and going, yes, it did what you thought it was going to do, or hey, no, it's not doing what you think it's going to do.
And you're doing this based on the swing of a needle, or are there people in back with more advanced equipment that are like...
Yeah, no, it's actually super advanced equipment. So we have a full computer package in the back. It's got 2 computer screens, and the whole right side of the airplane is the whole brains of it. And they have basically amounts to be about 7 or 8 EKG traces that are tracking volts and amps and signal. There's a whole bunch of different things that they're tracking. But the stuff that they can see won't even register on a needle. We will pull the system down and shut it off before you'd even see it in the cockpit. So it's actually a pretty conservative system.
Explain me this. So I was flying into Little Rock the other day, and I get our final vector, turn heading, whatever, you're maintain, yada, yada, clear for the ILS, right? So I'm going in, I'm like, all of a sudden I start to be like, we should start seeing the needle come in right now. And sure, needle doesn't come in at all. And, we have the terrain up and everything, and we just basically blow right through the localizer. And the localizer never came in. We lost the ident and all of that stuff. And we ended up just like going to the other parallel runway, and they vectored us onto that approach, and we flew that one. Did it just fail like that? And the guy in the tower is like, really? Are you sure? Like, he had no idea what appeared that the ILS had shut off itself.
Yeah, so
you don't have a light for that or anything?
That's basically what we're out there testing. Is we're not only setting the regular standard for the ILS, but we're checking what are called alarms. So they have parameters that when the system exceeds that parameter, a light goes off and shuts the system offline. And so what we're doing is we're having them set the power to whatever that maximum or minimum is, and then we go out and check and go, hey, is it performing the way it's supposed to? And then they're checking, hey, did it actually shut off? But look, ATC may have just not turned the system on. They may have had a different runway turned on, right? So there's a number of different reasons that could happen. I had one a little while ago. We were flying an ILS, and this is at a major airport. You know, when we're out there, they note the system out of service because we're doing a whole bunch of weird things to the system. It's not going to perform the way you would expect it to. And so we go in, and I'm at, I don't know, about a half mile, 3/4 mile final on an ILS, and the airplane just rolls into a 30-degree right bank. And I'm in the right seat. The other guy's in the left seat flying. And I turn to him, I go, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, wait, what the hell's going on here? So we initiate a go around. We ask air traffic, hey, is it on the right? Is the ILS up and running, and is it operating properly? And they go, yes, it is. Come back around again, and the exact same thing happens, except instead of rolling into a 30-degree right turn, it rolls into a 30-degree left turn. So we go around again, and now I get on with air traffic, and I'm in my not-so-friendly voice, and I'm like, did you, like, taxi an airplane across the runway? Do you have somebody in the critical area? Like, what is going on? And they're like, no, we got nobody out there. I'm like, okay, cool. So I asked the guy in the back to call the ground guys to go walk outside the shack. Do you see anything out there? And they're like, no, nothing. So we're like racking our brains, and nobody can come up with any idea. So I'm like, hey, let's go try it one more time. So we try it one more time. Same thing, rolls into a 30-degree right bank turn. And so I don't know why I remembered this, but if you take a look at localizer antennas, they're about 1,000 to 1,200 feet off the departure end of the runway. So let's say you have runway 36 and 18. They both have ILSs on either end. They have something called an interlock, which means when you have the ILS for 36 up and running, it automatically shuts the one down for 18. And vice versa. We're coming in on final, the interlock failed. So guess what? 2 localizers up and radiating. That other localizer antenna, about a half a mile final is where that thing turns on and where you start picking up the signal. And it jammed the other localizer. And that's why it rolled us into a 30-degree bank turn. Now, that's one of the things we check for is that interlock to make sure that's working properly. But we called up the ground guys and said, hey, do me a favor, go and go check the interlock. And they go, oh, yeah, no, it failed. Both of them are up and radiating right now. Okay, cool. Shut the system down, note it off the air, replace the part. We'll come back in 2 weeks. And that's what we're there to do. There's the guy in air traffic control in the tower. He doesn't know that. He just knows he's got the right button pushed. But that's why those guys go out monthly to check the systems, and why we go out every, depending year to 3 years, depending on what the system is, and go out and check it to catch those things.
You mean the ground dudes go out to every ILS monthly?
They're constantly going out there and rechecking that, because when they have what are called pre-flight checks. So they're out there, they're checking their power settings and what they call their references against what we told them was good. So they're checking that all the time. So if they see it on the ground that, hey, it's drifting, they'll shut the system off the air and call us in. The system itself is monitoring itself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So that will shut itself down if that fails. And then we come out on top of that to recheck the references that we originally gave them to make sure they're comparable. So you've got basically 3 different systems monitoring those at any given time. Any one of them will shut them off. So it's a pretty safe system.
So are there ILSs that are being decommissioned and replaced by LPV because it's got to be substantially cheaper to operate?
No, because a $30 GPS jammer and you just lost your approach. Right?
Well,
I mean, you could just go to Radio Shack and shut the whole system down.
I get that at O'Hare and LAX and all these big airports. That totally makes sense. But what about Prescott? Like, the world doesn't come to an end if the ILS in Prescott goes out of service.
It's less about them shutting the ILSs down and more about airports that never could afford an ILS are now getting LPV approaches. So they're getting precision approaches to runways that normally would not have had those.
Yeah, I mean, because they like the VORs is a good example, right? Where they've decommissioned a lot of VORs, but they intend to keep I don't remember what the terminology is.
It's called minimum operational network, VOR mod.
That's it, the minimum operational network going because of GPS jamming.
So my job for 2 years was to fly around every single VOR in the country at, I think it was 70 miles, and check to see if it would work so that they could figure out which ones they could and could not shut down. That's how we figured it out. Yeah. So what they did is they just took all the VORs in the country and went, okay. and they would give us like 3 a week, and they would go fly a 70-mile orbit around the whole facility. And that's what you would do. You'd fly a 70-mile orbit around the whole facility.
70-mile DME
Time,
Yep,
turn,
that's exactly what
twist.
Yeah, for about 2.5, 3 hours, you would fly an orbit around that VOR, and you would go, hey, is everything in tolerance, yes or no? Because you remember, the normal VOR is 40 miles, right? So we would go out, I think it was like 70 was the mileage. Like, I might be wrong on that, but I think it was 70 miles. And we go, yeah, that one will work, that one won't. And that's how they plotted, hey, these are the ones we're going to pull down, and these are the ones we're going to keep.
What is your favorite VOR in the United States?
I'm not a VOR fan, man. We could do a whole another episode on carving up VORs. We do a 360-degree orbit around the VOR at like 6 miles, checking every single radial to make sure it's within radial tolerance, effectively 2.5 degrees. Then you go out and you fly every single approach and make sure that's in tolerance. Then you got to do every ground receiver checkpoint, every airborne receiver checkpoint. You got to do live voice, high wash, checking all those things. Guess what?
My God.
If at any time any of that fails, you now have to go over the VOR and pick a radial and fly it out to 40 miles at an altitude and go, oh, it's out of tolerance. Okay, go back to the VOR, climb up 1,000 feet, do it again. Oh, it's still out of tolerance. Go back to the VOR, climb up 1,000 feet, do it again. You just keep doing it over and over and over until you go, oh, okay, hey, this works at 7,000 feet. Okay, cool. Now we got to pick another radial to find out how far out this goes. Okay, so 360 radial at 5,000. Okay, now let's go to the 030 and see if it works there. You just carve it up. So usually the guy in the back and the guy up front has a diagram of VOR, and like you're literally drawing out like, okay, hey, it doesn't work here. Okay, it doesn't work here. Okay, it doesn't work here. And then that's why you see those unusable beyond 35 miles up below 5,000 feet. You're like, and you're reading that. That's how we got it. We've just flew it radially over and over and over at different altitudes until we went, okay, there, it's in tolerance.
Are you kind of doing the navigating and directing for the person that's trying to fly? Like, how does that work? Because I would imagine that the person that's flying is very focused on keeping the airplane right on the radio, correct?
Yeah, the flying's actually the easy job. So the way we do it is the PIC actually sits in the right seat, not the left seat. The SIC sits in the left seat and does the flying duties, because that's honestly the easy part. You're just flying it, right? The guy in the right seat is calling air traffic to coordinate. Then you're on the frequency with air traffic. Then you're tuning up every single, gotta remember, we're out there VFR. So we're tuning up every Unicom at every airport that we plan on flying over to listen to traffic, right? To let them know who we are and where we are and what's going on. Half of them have student pilots that don't know the difference between north, south, east, and west. So you're really trying to figure out like, hey, that guy said he's here, but how confident do you think he is that that's where he's actually at? You're monitoring the tolerances for the facility. So you can back up the computer operator in the back to go, no, that's in tolerance or that's out of tolerance. If let's say you fly a VOR and the guy in the back goes, that's out of tolerance, you're pulling up low en route charts, high en route charts, instrument approach plates to go that, okay, now we need to note this approach out of service, that airway out of service. And you're thinking, what do we need to shut down? Then you're physically writing the NOTAMs out that are being issued. There's 4 radios going at any given time. You have one with ground guys that are doing the physical maintaining of the facility. One is the intercom between the 3 of us on board the airplane. You then have a Unicom for whatever VFR airport you're operating out, and then you have air traffic. And then on top of it, we can have 2 trainees on board at any given time. A trainee pilot, meaning they're a licensed pilot, but they're learning how to certify navigators. And then a trainee mission specialist, trainee computer operator. So you could have 2 instructors and 2 students on board an airplane at any given time. It's easy. Yeah. When you're doing that, you're flying a lot slower. You're not rushing anything. You're just taking your time. But it's, no different than at the airlines, right? I mean, you grab a brand new FO and you go out. The advantage that we have is we're typically getting very experienced pilots.
If this job actually does sound interesting to folks, like what are the advantages of this besides a more traditional career path?
A pension, 401k. Healthcare for the rest of your life. You fly Monday through Friday, basically 8 a.m. to 4:30. You hardly ever fly any weekends. I mean, I might fly 1 weekend a year. Most of that's voluntary. I think in 10 years, they've asked me to fly on a weekend like, hey, we really need you to do this once. Don't work any holidays. I don't know. They treat you really well. The advantage is, right, when you're done with your work during the day, you got to remember, an airline pilot goes out and works 12 to a 14-hour duty day. Our duty days are 8 hours. So you have all that additional time outside of your flying time to really explore whatever it is that you want, whether that's time with your family, so on and so forth. I would say 90% of our flying is VFR because you can't certify a NavAid IFR, right? We're not going to go out.
I was going to ask you.
Do it one time.
It's part of it. You've told us before too. Part of certifying the NavAid is like looking outside to see if anybody built a ham radio antenna on the 5 mile final, right?
Yeah. So effectively speaking, our weather minimums are 2,000 foot ceilings and 10 miles visibility. So in 10 years, I've probably shot 5 actual instrument approaches to minimums.
But you probably have better instrument skills than anybody.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I'll smoke any of you guys on hand flying an instrument approach. But we're not flying in thunderstorms.
Right.
We're not flying in gusts into 35 or 40 knots because you can't measure anything reliably in that type of weather. We don't de-ice. We just don't go. Because the thing is, if you're de-icing, the ceilings are usually too low. So, I mean, you'll get some type 1 maybe twice a year because you got some frost on, but you're not like doing type 4. You're just not doing it. You're not landing contaminated runways. You're not doing any of that stuff. It's like a VFR flying club. So yeah, I'm not getting my head pounded against the sidewall of the airplane, looking at radar returns, trying to pick my way through. So we just don't go. So they don't question your safety decisions because the stuff that we do is higher risk. We were talking about this before we started recording, but I was out doing an instrument approach and we're flying and I happen to look out my right window and I go to the guy I'm flying with, I go, dude, are they building a water tower right there? And we looked at it, he goes, yeah, they are. And the whole water tower wasn't built, right? And so we go fly over, we get the latitude and longitude. You know, we send it over to the appropriate people and they call up and go, hey, what's the altitude of the tower going to be? So on and so forth. Make sure that they have it in their database and everything. So we're not going out in 400 foot ceilings looking for water towers. Like that's stupid. You know, when we have we do a risk matrix every time before we fly. And so if you have any of those things that score too high or you're like, hey, look, I've got a guy who's newer to the organization. I don't think it's a good idea to put him in this position. They'll just give it to a different flight crew to do it. So they're really supportive. They back you up. They don't question your safety decisions. It's pretty cool.
Are aircraft based all in like strategic geographic locations around the country, or is everyone in one and then you're like, okay, you're off to New York this week and then you do California, or like how do they do that?
Yeah. So we have a domestic and an international flight program. So we do all the military bases overseas. We do the war zones. And we do Antarctica for the scientific research mission. So we use Challenger 601, 604, 605s for those. And then we have a domestic flight program. They still use the Challengers for domestic, but it's really more King Air flying for domestic. Funny enough, we don't get paid any different whether you're a King Air pilot or a Challenger pilot. The per diem's a little different, but other than that, it's all the same money. So we have 2 offices on the East Coast, 2 offices in the Midwest, and then 1 office on the West Coast. And so we have our service areas, like my office covers basically the Dakotas to Pennsylvania down to Kentucky. And you're just responsible for all the facilities in that area. And then the different offices will take kind of their own stuff. But we have a prioritization. So like, for example, if there's ever an accident, that's our top priority. We're going to go out and recheck that system to make sure it wasn't the system's problem. Because you don't want somebody like going after that. Down from there becomes all the major like all the Class B airports, right? Because you don't want to shut down commerce. And then down from there, there's a continuum of like, hey, this is how we prioritize. So we have schedulers. They go through, they write up the priorities for the week. They send that to you in a schedule. They're very collaborative. It's kind of weird. Like as a PIC or as a captain, imagine like being a captain in the 50s in terms of the level of like control you have with all the CRM of current. So meaning like there's no tyrants, but you have a large degree of autonomy to work with your team to figure out what's the best way to get the work done. So it's kind of cool. There's a lot of CRM, but there is a very, very, very high degree of autonomy. And so you're working really close with the schedulers. You're working really close with the mission specialist, which is a computer operator in the back, and very close with the ground guys to figure out, okay, what order do we do this in? You're trying to make it as efficient as you can to limit the downtime between facilities because we have so much work to do constantly, right? I mean, you think about every ILS, every VOR, every NDB, every set of PAPI lights, every runway edge light, every runway identifier light, every GPS approach has to constantly be checked, plus all the new stuff people are adding. Oh, you want to change a departure or an arrival? You want to add a new set of lights? You want to upgrade a VASI to a PAPI? All that stuff has to get checked. So we're trying to limit the downtime in between locations. So we're not flying airplanes across the country. So they'll send you a schedule and you'll plot that out on a map, and then you'll take a look at all the weather and you'll go, okay, now let's rearrange it this way so we can get this done. Or you'll take what you were going to do on Friday, make that Monday. There's a lot of adjusting that goes on.
So you mentioned the Class B airports. How do you do Chicago? Do you do that at 2 a.m? Like you said, you work 9 to 5.
We do. Those are the rare cases where we actually fly nights. So think about Reagan National, Dulles, Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, LAX, San Francisco. We're very disruptive to the airspace. We're flying across traffic all day long. So they're not going to let us in the airspace at 2 p.m. and shut down their departures and arrivals. So usually you get a lull between about 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., let's call it. And so depending on the airport and depending on what their departures and arrivals look like, we will work with air traffic to get permission to enter the airspace somewhere between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. But we only do one of those facilities per night. So you're usually flying for about 2 hours and you're usually on the ground by like 1 or 2 in the morning.
So what about the GPS approaches? Since there's no dude on the ground and none of that, are you mostly just checking for obstacles and interference or what?
Yeah, there's kind of two components to it. So the one component is obstacle checks, right? You're making sure that there's no towers there, or power lines or anything like that. The second component is the guy in the back is actually measuring the quality of the GPS signal. And there's a whole bunch of HBL, VPL. There's all these things that go into it that, quite frankly, if you were to ask me what those acronyms meant off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. But they're measuring all of those in the back and they're data logging and recording those. And then those get everything we touch gets put into a report, and that report gets filed and sent to the local airport manager, so they have a record of everything that's going on. Because we're not only tracking as something in tolerance or out of tolerance, we're trying to be proactive and say, hey, something is drifting towards intolerant or out of tolerance. Let's see if we can. It's kind of like you don't wait to change your car tire until after the tire explodes. You measure the tread, right? And when the tread gets down to a certain level, you say, okay, let's rotate or let's replace. That's the same way we do it with the facilities.
Is it easier to flight check a GPS approach, though? Is it less reps through the approach and everything, or is it pretty similar?
Yeah, because it kind of works or it doesn't. It's like on or off.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. There's no adjustment to be made. It's either like this either works or not. So
when you're certifying a new GPS approach, all you're doing is you're going out and you're flying every single leg of the approach. And then the guy in the back is measuring all the quality of the GPS signal and he's monitoring that. And then up front, we're out the window looking for obstacles. We have a really big package that they give us. It's usually about 20 or 30 pages long. And it gives you all the ones and zeros behind how they design the approach. So like we're not looking at an approach plate. We're physically looking at the documentation on how they created it. And then based on that, we make a decision on what needs to be checked. They give us with the highest obstacle, they call it controlling obstacles. So they'll give us the highest obstacle for each segment. We then plot that on maps. We do a map study to check to make sure, hey, look, is there anything taller than that on there? We then load it into our GPS on board the airplane. And then we go out and physically fly over it, verify that it's where they say it is, and then check the whole segment and make sure that there's nothing else out there taller than that. So that's primarily what you're doing. And then you're doing low passes over the runway to make sure that the alignment's correct and the angle's correct and all that other stuff.
What about the radius to fix the RMPAR approaches? Do you guys do those too?
We do. I did all the certifications of the ones in Detroit. We don't have a ton of those in the Midwest. You see a lot of those on the coasts. California, where you got mountains and everything, that's going to be really useful. New York, you got a lot of busy airspace trying to maneuver people around.
Yeah. Like Midway, you did the one in Midway?
Yeah.
Those ones in Midway?
Yeah, I do Midway, O'Hare, and Detroit constantly. But like, it turns out there's not a huge need for those in Iowa. Or Nebraska.
That's the point.
It's just they just
it's either terrain or high traffic areas, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that like for these larger airports. I mean, when was the last time you shot a RNAV approach into Midway?
The RNAV RMP one.
Yeah.
On regularly, but yeah.
So you'll get something like that, but when you're going into LAX or O'Hare, they have them, but they don't use them a ton.
Yeah. Well, we request them and then they say negative. That's going to be vectors to the ILS. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's on request. We'll let you know.
The system is still heavily reliant on GPS for en route and ground-based navigation for the approach. I mean, nothing beats the reliability of a Cat 3 ILS. So, like I said, you can't pick up a $50 GPS jammer and take it out along the highway.
Well said. The airplane you're flying obviously is capable of Cat 3 sensitivity and beyond, I would imagine, right?
Dude, I have certified probably 1,000 Cat 3 approaches and have never actually flown in the airplane because we don't have the equipment. We have the equipment to certify it, but not to fly it, which doesn't make any sense to people. What people don't realize is we try and certify every ILS to a Cat 3 standard. So whether it's in category 1, 2, or 3, we're actually trying to certify it to a category 3 standard. And so the instrumentation required to fly a category 3 is really more about the autopilot that you have on the airplane. But you only need that if you're actually landing in Cat 3 conditions. If you're not landing in Cat 3 conditions, you can actually hand fly a Cat 3 approach all day long, which is what we do. So we actually hand fly the Category 3 approach, and we actually touch down on the 1,000-foot markers, and we roll out on center line the full length of the runway, checking to make sure that localizer is within. It's effectively about a 10-foot tolerance of that center line.
So you heard it here first, folks. That you are cleared to go below 200 feet on a Category 1 ILS per James.
Yeah.
Down to and including 50 feet.
Yeah, we tried.
It is safe.
Definitely wouldn't do that.
Okay, I've got a question for you, James. this is tying everything together here back to the scenario-based questions in the interview. I'm sure you've heard somebody ask, okay, it's 0-0 day and you got to get on the ground. What are you going to do? Everything's fogged in. You have no more gas. And people say, yeah, I would just couple it to the ILS and come on down and try and touch it down. What do you think about that?
So that's funny that you say that, because if you go into the airport facility directory, there is a code in there that will tell you if that's going to work. And so if you're bored and you go take a look at Little Rock and you go to page 2 of the airport facility directory, it'll give you the ILSs, and there's an ILS to runway 4 right, 22 left, and 22 right. 4 right is what's called a 1A, 22 left is a 1B, and 22 right is a 3E. So there's a number and a letter. The number tells you what level it's certified to, so 1, 2, or 3. And then the letter tells you how far it goes to meet category 3 tolerances. So
say 1, 2, 3. Are you meaning category 1, 2, or 3?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So like if you were to go take a look at 4 right in Little Rock, it'll say class 1A. So it means it's category 1 facility and it meets category 3 tolerances to what's called point A, which is a 4-mile final. I would not shoot that down to 0-0. You ain't going to make it. Right? Okay. So the runway 22 left says a 1B. So that is basically 3,500 feet out on final. So about a half mile final is where it drops out of Cat 3 tolerances. And then 22 right is a 3E. And so what that means, it meets category tolerances all the way to the last 2,000 feet of the runway. What you would want to see for letters is if you see a T, it meets category 3 tolerances to the threshold. If you see a D, it meets category 3 tolerances basically to the end of the touchdown zone. And if you see E, it's to the last 2,000 feet of a runway. So you would want to see a T, a D, or an E as a letter there before you decided to use that in a 0-0 condition if it wasn't actually a category 3 approach.
Wow.
Now,
How's
James,
that
did
for
you just
fun, useless
Boom.
facts?
Wait, did you just happen to have an airport facility directory on your desk, or did you bring this into play because of this interview?
He knew.
Or is this just light reading for you on a...
When you said Little Rock earlier, I pulled it up because I was curious. Because when you said it
Do you
was...
have a full current library of the airport facility directories of the Midwest in your region?
What I actually do in my spare time is read airport facility directories. So the funny thing is, before we go out, this is actually what we do. We read every approach plate, all the airport facility directories, all the low and route shouts, all that stuff. And so I'm pretty good at skimming through them pretty quick. But I get that question all the time, 0-0, would you shoot the ILS? And the answer is, if it said T, D, or E, yes, I would. If it doesn't, no, I won't.
Wow. See, that might help somebody on an interview. You never know.
Well, it might help you in real life. Honestly, when you're bored, go into the airport facility directory. It'll say class, and it'll say 1A, 1B, 3E. A is 4 miles on final. I think B is 3,500 feet on final. I think class C is 100 feet on glide slope. T is a threshold. D is 3,000 feet down the runway. And E is 2,000 feet from the end.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang.
That was off memory. So if somebody checks me on that and I'm wrong on one of them, I apologize. But the T, D, and E, I'm definite on. Those are
very impressive. Okay, James, we got to get a couple stories out of you before we wrap up. I imagine you've had some excitement.
Usually around people putting up obstacles, we didn't realize. I had one where I was training a guy. So I'm an instructor. So when we do low approaches on the ILS, if you ever see a flight check, you'll see them, they go down the runway at 50 feet, down the full length of the runway. And what they're doing is they're measuring to make sure the localizer is meeting the alignment tolerance, meaning that it's not skewed off the runway center line. And so when you're the flying pilot, you have to cross the threshold on center line at 50 feet, on glide path, 50 feet over the threshold every time. So if any guy, when you fly an ILS, the closer you get in, the more sensitive it gets. So the flying pilot, you're heavily focused on looking outside for the center line and looking inside for the glide slope. And guy I'm training's in the right seat because he's just getting ready to get signed off. And he goes, dude, what's that? And I go, what? And I look at the end of the runway and it is an airplane landing opposite direction to us. So I immediately go full power, punch out, right turn. And I said to him, I'm like, dude, I never heard him on the radio. Did you hear him on the radio? He's like, I never heard him either. We call him on the Unicom. Guy never answers. So we call the airport manager on Unicom and say, hey, can you have him come up when he pulls into the FBO? It turned out he had the 1 digit off on the Unicom frequency. GA traffic, just a tail dragger. The crop dusters operate at the exact same altitude we do, no transponder. So I was in training and my instructor was in the left seat and he's getting himself set up for the next approach. And I look at them and I go, dude, my controls. And I grab it and I just snapped us into a 60-degree right bank turn at about 900 feet. And he goes, what? And I go, look out the window. And it's just a crop duster just goes zooming right on by.
Oh, geez.
Nothing on TCAS, nothing on Stratus, nothing. No radio either. He wasn't talking. So you get stuff like that when you're doing a lot of these like uncontrolled VFR airports. And then every once in a while you get like somebody's building a water tower they didn't tell you about. And so one of the other things that it's called RFI. So we track radio frequency interference. And so if people put up like rogue, like radio stations, we go out and go track those. So we get to go hang out with the FCC and go find people that put radio stations up that they weren't supposed to. Yeah, a lot of stuff is go out and like ILS will get taken off the air. And you'll go out there and you'll find out that like one of the local radio stations had some type of like limiter or repeater that's broken. And so it's just letting out boatloads of interference. Commercial kitchens, if you have like large ovens, will, if they have electrical shorts in there, I remember one of them was like a goldfish factory or something silly like that, like crackers. And they had an issue in one of their ovens and it took out like an ILS. So you get to weird things like that. But you go out chasing that for days. I mean, you don't know where it's coming from or why it's coming. So you're just using triangulation to narrow it down. So you start at a really high altitude and you start descending lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And eventually you find it. You go, it's right there. And then they send somebody out to go talk to them and they'll send a mechanic out to go take a look at the pieces and the parts and they find whatever it is and replace it. And then we can turn the facility back on. So
what about when somebody overruns a runway? I saw this in Hawthorne. There's a Phenom that overran the runway and went through the localizer antenna, like clipped off a bunch of the pieces.
I did the recertification. Remember that Gulfstream? It was in Massachusetts somewhere. Bedford, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bedford.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was out there and we were doing the recertification. And dude, we got list facilities. So we're out there and we're doing the ILS. We're doing a like commissioning of it basically. And they're like, okay, hey, can you guys take a look at the lights? And I'm like, what's the matter with the lights? Like, oh, we had to replace them. I'm like, son of a gun, is this from? And they're like, yeah, that's from. So we got sent out afterwards to go check those lights. And I think they took out the localizer antenna too. So,
wow.
Yeah. We did a lot of weird things, man. It's a fun job.
We've done it all. We've said it all, guys. Yeah. What else is left?
Check it out if you're interested.
James, how's your relationship?
How's my relationship?
Want to get into that? Or should we leave that one to next time?
How you sleeping, James?
How you sleeping, James?
Trying to convince her to let me buy an airplane. And you guys are helping me with that.
Have you been exercising enough?
Oh, yeah, tons. That's what I do. Exercise and fly.
Exercise, fly. And he's getting a twin Cessna. I love it.
Maybe.
I love it.
If our mutual friend gets interested.
And will you just hand fly it the entire time too?
No, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have one of the other partners fly me. I'll be in the back.
Yeah. He's tired.
I'll show everybody how to certify a pappy.
Yeah.
That'll raise the hair on the back of your neck. Do you know how we know that all red lights clear all the obstacles?
Oh.
Yeah. Somebody's got to go out and do it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. You ever find a tree that's too high?
You trimmed it?
Nope.
That's why they fly King Airs. So they can
go a little bit lower and a little bit lower until one guy is sitting there with his hands on the flight controls ready to pull back at any given time. And he has the right to pull back and the other guy just releases. Right. So one guy's looking out the window with his hands behind the yoke. And if he gets uncomfortable, just yanks back on the yoke and the other guy doesn't fight him. The other guy, hands on the yoke, looking out the window as well. And both of them are calling out what the highest obstacle is they see. But what you're doing is you're getting as low as you can, right, safely above the obstacle, but making sure that all lights are red. Well, what happens if you fly over the obstacle and one of them turns white? You got to go back and see if you can get a little lower. Yeah, that's how it's done.
Because you did avoid the obstacle at that point.
You did. You just have to be able to avoid it. You have to make sure you're not going to hit it. But it's a judgment call over, I'm not getting any closer. Like, I'm not going to prove that it's too tall by hitting it. So, yeah, dude. How do you think that stuff gets certified?
For the men and women out there doing the Lord's work.
Wow. We do it so you don't have to.
James, I tell you what, all the ILSs I fly tomorrow, I'm going to have a much greater appreciation for all of the work that goes into keeping that safe.
Barroom trivia on, hey man, what does that class 1-3E mean? What is that?
Yeah, I can't wait to just drop that on some know-it-all.
Max is going to. Yeah. Here's Max's favorite move. He gets into like the definition of like civil twilight and angles of the sun. He's going to go right into this.
No, that wasn't what it was a question I used to ask when I was a CFI.
Yeah.
It was because you could encompass all these things into one. I said, explain to me how you could not be night current, yet legally log nighttime with passengers on board.
Oh, so the 1 hour.
Yeah, because it's 1 hour, but then evening civil twilight, it's the whole thing.
Yeah. This is Max's. Here's this go-to move.
Now you got a new one to torture.
Yeah, you got a new one. This would be great.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Hey, you ever wonder, how do you know all red's going to clear the trees?
Some crazy guys
Now,
out there.
How would you know if this Cat 3 CILS was certified to the threshold?
Yeah.
Or,
Where do you think the Cat 3 drops off at?
you float so long. We better make sure this is certified at least to midfield because
Yeah. The other one people don't pay attention to is no autopilot coupled below.
Oh, yeah. Monterey,
no.
California.
Yeah,
Classic
Monterey.
example.
I've always remembered that one.
It's called the change of rate reversal. We'll say that for a future episode.
Okay. All right. That'll be next time. And how to get hired at a ACMI carrier plus.
If your interviewer is going bad and you want to make the interviewer sound stupid, start asking these questions.
Tell me about the beat frequency oscillation setting on the ADF.
Yeah.
So how does,
Yeah, exactly.
remember that BFO one?
Yeah.
What's the difference between flight inspection service volume and standard service volume?
Yeah. Tell me the difference between a high, medium high, and high NDB.
Yeah.
The service volumes, please.
Yeah. How come a localizer is good to 18 miles, but the LAX plate lets us go out to 50?
Oh.
Yeah. Why can't I
Oh, why
intercept
is
that
that?
from Seaview at 30 miles out?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, why is that?
That's a good question, James.
Can you
I
answer?
know. It's called an expanded service volume. Guys, you got to say future episode.
Wait, let me
Okay.
guess. Let me guess.
We're gonna-
Teaser.
You had to flight check that?
Yeah, of course I did.
We'll have James's LinkedIn information. If this kind of work sounds interesting to you, reach out to him on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he can tell you a little bit more about it. You can book an appointment with James. We'll have the link there in the show notes so that you can get on his calendar. James, we always appreciate your knowledge and your insight. Next time, please return to the turtleneck tactical garment. I think it just gives you more gravitas when you speak.
Wore a collared shirt for you
Now,
guys today. I
it's
got
a
no
turtleneck.
credit for it.
I need the 360 degree
guys.
coverage. Yeah. Yeah. All right, that's it. James Onieal, Raven Careers. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon, James. Thanks.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks, James.
Well, that is going to do it for another episode of the 21.5 show. Max, I enjoyed our discussion at the beginning. We were like setting up the recording, and Joel's like, what are we going to talk about to begin with? And sometimes that works out when we just wing it, and sometimes it doesn't.
I said, drop that beat, Joel, and we'll figure it out.
That's the secret, is you got to play the West Coast rap to get the juices flowing.
Yeah.
So
Especially when I'm doing this after working all day.
I know.
In the morning, I'm just like shot out of a cannon, but after the end of the day.
every time we have to record with Max late at night, I'm always worried. But you really brought it today. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I stepped it up for you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Now, are you going to go enjoy everything that Bellingham has to offer?
Indeed. Yes.
Okay.
The airport hotel restaurant. It's
Hey, the border's right there. They'll just scan your face with the little iPhone. It takes like a second. You don't even need your passport anymore.
pretty sure you and I actually crossed the Canadian border in the last 12 months
Oh,
in a vehicle, and we certainly did have to surrender our passports.
Oh, that's
I'll remind
right.
you there, Mr. International Traveler.
Yeah, well, listen. And then, Joel, did you hear the episode where the Goodyear blimp guy was telling us he crossed the border in Bellingham? And then they're like, what are all these tanks of nitrogen or whatever, or helium? And they like pointed up. That's just right there, Max.
Oh, speaking of that, of seasoned international travelers, like Joel, you would think like pilots would be on top, especially ones that like fill out EAPIS. And
this is our story time to end the episode. This is perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, here's my story. So I'm sitting there with my wife, and she pulls out, we're going to the Bahamas for spring break, right? So she pulls out the kids' passports, and she goes, "Oh my God." I'm like, "What?" She goes, "The kids' passports expired last week." And this is like a week and a half from when we have to leave.
Oh, no.
I'm like, no. And I forgot, kids' passports are only good for 5 years.
Yeah.
Which is like
Wow.
about half as much as adult passports. So I was thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, they haven't had these for even close to that. So we're good. So fortunately, in Arizona, in Tucson, we have a passport center where you can go if you have travel, international travel, within less than 2 weeks, you can go there. You have to prove it, and you can make an appointment. You get a passport issued that day. And I knew about this. So I get on the computer, I call, I'm like, tell them what happened. They're like, okay, when is your day of travel? And it was a Saturday. And she goes, well, we have an appointment at 12:30 and 1 o'clock on that Friday before you travel. And we had to leave the house at 5 in the morning. Right. I'm like, okay, we'll take the 12:30. And so I had to get the kids out of school a day before Friday morning, load up in the Moose. We fly to Tucson. We rent the crew car. The gal lets me take the crew car. I'm like, look, I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't know how long it's going to take, but it's going to take a long time. And she's like, it's fine. We don't have anything going on. So we get in the crew minivan, me and the boys, And we roll out to the passport center. And unfortunately, my wife's very organized. She had all the paperwork, paperclip. So you go to the first station. And they're like, oh, well, this is very good. Very nice. And they catalog, make sure you have all the paperwork. And then you go wait for the next to go to the person that's actually like processes it. And she goes, oh, I don't know if these passport photos are going to work.
Oh, no.
I'm like,
What?
She's like, well, yeah, I think they're too close. And like, listen, we leave tomorrow. Like, you got to help me out here. She's like, hold on. So she goes and like, they end up taking it. They're like, we don't normally do this, but you seem like you're really in a position here. And I'm like, yeah, it's self-induced. I get it. I don't skip the lecture. They extra passport photos, retook the kids' passport photos. Anyway, it took all day. We literally took off in the morning. We landed after sunset. It was a whole, and then went home.
Are you serious? I didn't know that part.
Yeah, it took all day, dude. We were waiting forever. It was after it closed. It was a nightmare.
Oh my gosh.
That was actually a stress test. It had nothing to do with the pictures. It was to see how you would perform.
Oh,
You
that's
must have passed.
Ooh.
I'm just kidding. I have no idea. Maybe I
I
just
had these great photos. One of my kid passed out in a folding chair. It was a war zone. And the thing is, dude, you think I was the only one going on international travel for spring break? Like, it was the busiest it ever been.
Oh.
The place closed at 3. They didn't give me my passport till 5.
I'm blown away they actually like stayed open for it. I'm surprised they didn't like, well, it's 3, sorry.
Yeah.
I know you would have thinking a government, but listen, people were desperate. They didn't want to riot on their hands.
Shout out to the Tucson passport. I had to go down there too. I washed my passport one time. And then
they were very friendly.
Yeah,
They
they
saw
were
the-
super nice. Yeah. I mean, it's
They
not
saw
like,
the Silicon Valley Bank on the TV. They were like, we can't have one of those rush things.
We can't have this riot here.
None of that.
Everyone gets a passport. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the seasoned traveler, customs expert,
Mhm. Yeah. We're all learning here
and-
together.
and village idiot all at
Yeah.
the same time. But we made it. So
Now, if they hadn't gotten it, you would just left them at home, or
that's what I kept telling them. They're like, Dad, what if? I'm like, guys, I don't know. They closed at 3. This is getting close. They're like, well, what are we going to do? I'm like,
I'm going to my spring break.
this guy's going to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys are
Yeah.
going to do. They're like, wait, seriously? Would you really leave us? I'm like, bro, I paid for this. It's already
Yeah.
paid for.
Bro, Lord of the Flies.
Dude, I hope they give us our passports.
Me too.
We really want to go.
How long did their iPad battery last? And then,
Oh, genius over here didn't even bring iPads. I'm like, well, we'll go. See, last time I was like, I had this whole plan. You go, you do the paperwork, and then you leave, and you come back a couple hours later. I was like, oh, we'll go look at the Onieal. Maybe go to the P. Marion Space Museum. I had a whole
this will
thing.
be great.
Nope. They're like, yeah, don't go anywhere. And then they're like, okay, you can leave to go get lunch. Here's a receipt. You have to show this to the security guard. It was like, yeah, I was like, I was
Titan
going in and out of
Missile
Fort Knox. Yeah.
Biosphere 2,
Yeah.
kids. It'll be great.
Yeah. So it was a total like blunder in all respects.
Wow.
I barely had enough phone battery to navigate back to the FBO.
Gee,
They were closed. I had to like call the number.
Oh,
and the
wow.
guys, I had to fill out a credit card because they fueled the plane.
You need a vacation after that.
Yeah, no kidding. I hope you had a good time in Bahamas.
I did. Yeah, we had a great time. It was
Okay,
good.
good.
And the kids got to go. So it all worked out.
Oh. Many of your children got to
A
go.
bonus.
Most of them made it. Oh, that's
Yes.
funny. Good. Well, I'm glad you had a nice spring break. I think that's a great story to wrap things up. You have done it again, wasted at least a couple of hours listening to Max and Dylan's blunders. And
Wait, hold on. I just have one more kicker to this.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Last time we flew to Mexico, we were like always adamant. Like everybody has to physically show me their passport. And I check it against what I filed on the APIS because I've had people that send me their passport and then they get a new one and renew it in the meantime.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going through it and Christian's like, oh, do you have your passport? And we get everyone on the plane. And I'm like, yeah, here. And he looks at me and he goes, dude, this is a different passport number. I'm like, what? I was the idiot who had renewed his passport and didn't update the crew info in the APIS.
Wow. Look at all this disclosure today, Joel.
I know. That's it. Listen.
This is great.
He must be feeling some guilt for not offering so much pilot help to the aviation community.
Are you a pilot with a recently renewed passport? Do you have children who want to travel internationally? Do you know about face scanning? The latest episode of the 21.5 show could be for you. Consult a physician.
Oh, one last tip. Here's what I did at my overnight with the passport. I stuck it in the safe, which it's debatable if that's in the hotel room safe. I take one work shoe, one uniform shoe. I put my passport in the uniform shoe in the safe. Cannot leave. When you get dressed for work, you'll be looking for that uniform shoe. There you go.
That's pretty good strategy right
It was
there.
good strategy. Because I put it in the safe and I'm like, I'm going to forget this.
My first reaction was, what an idiot. But then I thought about it 5 seconds. And I was like, I could see myself doing that.
I could totally see myself. So I put the work shoe in there too. That's
Get to
my
the
little move.
Commandante, pull out your passport.
Yeah. And then you've only got one shoe on.
There's a 15-year-old kid with an M16. The Federal standing there. You look at him. He looks at you. You don't know what to do.
No pasporte.
Then you realize you shouldn't have ate the fruit that morning.
And then you remember the only word in Spanish, hielo, for ice.
Full circle.
Full circle. I
Well
just brought
done.
it around. What a pro. All right. Well, thanks to Tim Pope for joining us. James Onieal, of course. Advanced Aircrew Academy for sponsoring the show. Harvey Watt. All of their information is in the show notes. And, of course, thanks to all of our listeners for their continued support, downloads, emails, comments, and hopefully advice for Cabo San Lucas in our new layover guide. That is going to do it for us for a couple.
Or any tips for crossing the Sea of Cortez.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Anything else you got from Dylan?
What would be the middle coordinate there on the longitude?
I don't know. We'll call Roger Reeves, ask him. He's very familiar.
Yeah, I was looking for his landing
All
strips.
the small islands in the middle of the Sea of Cortez.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, when you are traveling internationally, remember flexibility.
No, it's remember to fake it till you make it.
Oh, yeah, till you make it. Yeah, fake it with your fake passport. Yeah, till you make it. All right.
See you next time.
We'll be back in a couple weeks. See you then.